here to have a great discussion about Magic the Gathering. Every single day we do this. So we go over all things Magic. And so you got to be brewing up your cup of Magic, whether it's coffee or tea, and wherever you are in the world, whether it's the morning, afternoon, or evening, it's always a good time to brew up yourself a cup of Magic and have some great Magic discussion today. So we have actually a really interesting show because we are going to be bringing on a blue-white specialist. Perhaps the hub of all blue-white control is going to be here speaking to us about this archetype. So so you better get ready with your control questions. Get ready with your control deck list because it's going to be really interesting because control can take many forms, branch off into many directions, whether you go with the red splash, whether you go with the green splash, whether you go with the black splash, you go Stoneblade, you go tempo, you go full on control. It's taken many evolutions, so bring on your questions today. It's going to be a really interesting discussion. Already, good morning, Costa 98, Neutral Good 123, and Coda 7913. So before we get on with our show, I would just quickly thank our sponsors, themanabase.com, your home base for everything Magic the Gathering. If you need your content on Commander for Standard, Modern, Legacy, and more, the Manabase is your home base for everything in Magic the Gathering. And Mana Traders, the premier place to rent cards online at the best value. You can support the show by using my Mana Traders link in the description below, or you can save 20% off your first 3 months by using the coupon code Nikachu. We're going to thank Mana Traders for being our sponsor. So without too much further ado, I would love to welcome our special guest, Blue-White Control Specialist, not only the creator of perhaps the largest Facebook group on Blue-White Control, the creator on the guide for the fundamentals on Blue-White Control, the really the person who takes all lists and is following the Blue-White, it's the heartbeat of Blue-White Control. Whenever there's a new list by anyone in the community, he's on it. I'd love to welcome Neo, aka Azorius Sage, to the channel. Thank you very much for coming on the show, Neo.
Hey, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's an honor.
So for those who are not familiar with yourself, please tell us a little bit of something about how you are integrated in the Blue-White Control community and what you've been doing lately.
Sure. Yeah, so I actually, it really took off when I started the community on Facebook in 2016. Started off very small. Didn't really have, the ambition to segue into what it's become. But then it just, players started to gravitate towards it. I started to share it on, other social media platforms,
Right.
and it grew from there. And then the passion just continued to fuel every other aspect of what I did. I wanted to branch out into, writing theory about blue-white, different variations of control. And as you said, there's mid-range, there's tempo. It's taken many forms since I first started playing. I mean, I started in 2010. Yes. This is like around the Callblade era. Callblade was one of my favorite decks. It really was the fundamental, the foundation of the way I play today, which is basically the ability to play control or tempo. It's like a hybrid, right?
Right.
And it was the deck to introduce that to me. And then I actually went into Sam Black's blue-white Doublerless, which had no dollars in it and went big. And that was actually one of my favorite decks because at the time, Stoneforge was banned, Jace was banned, and we had to evolve and we had to adapt. Right. And it was all about Tamiyo and Gideon Jura and, tapping down creatures and, beating in and the idea of, beating down, turning the corner, using like the Jund philosophy, controlling the game just enough to turn the corner, ended up being one of the most important aspects of playing control in Modern. And I felt from the get-go that this was something I wanted to address and own in on. And I did that through the community. I did it through articles, and now the largest primer probably ever written for blue-white. And then, so that's pretty much how, I took on the archetype.
So for everyone who comes onto this show, I would love to hear your perspective on, why do we play Blight Control? What is the core reason that we're running control in this fashion?
So I mean, we're talking about the standard control, right? This is like
Sure.
not the technical. Yeah. So I mean, players, from my experience is that I think it doesn't matter what the metagame looks like. I think just like Merfolk, I guess, or even Affinity back in the day, there's just players who are passionate about the archetype. And will just try to adapt it and evolve it through different, metagame shifts, which happens often in Modern. And I think that it's a deck that's highly customizable now, especially that
Oh
it
yeah.
oh yeah, it's very customizable, and you need to be in this format
Mm-hmm.
to keep up with what's going on, right? A lot of players tend to, when they first get into blue white, they're like, oh my god, the card pool is huge. But the thing is, it's good to have like a maybe board of like 50 to 100 cards, to adapt to the meta game, right? But also to shift your game. So you could be playing control one month, and then it's better time to be playing Stoneblade, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or even the mid-range temple list that you shared in your last episode. I think it's important to play this archetype if you're the kind of player who is keen on the metagame, because it's one of those decks where, like, if you know what the metagame's like, you can easily tailor your sideboard with things like Rest in Peace, time reinforcements, and there's a bit of everything for what's out there today. I think the issue with the deck, even with the unbanning of Stoneforge Mystic, is that it sometimes it loses to itself, really. I mean, you either don't hit
Sure.
land drops, yeah, it's too slow. Decks go over the top or under it, and so you have to you got to take the good with the bad. No deck is perfect, and that's something that
Exactly.
I always tell players that it's like you can play the flavor of the week, and you can try to play the best deck, but ultimately in Modern, you're just like Reed Duke and all the other greats who really are masters of their archetypes. You will gain leverage and you'll have equity playing a deck that you really understand and know how to evolve, know the ins and outs of your deck against particular archetypes, and also just understanding the principles of Modern, right? Because it may seem like there's so many decks, but a lot of them are just variations of each other. So when you
Yes.
understand that aspect of Modern, then it's easier to have a plan that can cross perform, right? So like a lot of times I see even in your list, like you have a plan that works against, let's say, humans, but it also works against other decks that go wide or other decks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like you understand that it's this strategy is for decks that do this, not just specifically for humans. Or so when you
Yep.
start using that philosophy in control, you tend to just adapt, right? You're just like, okay, I know what this deck's trying to do. This is a big mana. It's not like Tron or Escape Shift or variations of Scott and Escape Shift, because there's been so many hybrids now. Like, I think one of the scariest looking decks I've seen recently, which is like absurd. I never want to play against it. Is that Bant Stoneblade deck that also had Karn, the Great Creator, in it, and it had Teferi with Knowledge Pool. There's like 4 different things going on in that deck, and I'm like, okay, this is not something you plan for, and you might lose, and that's okay, and that's Modern, right? So I mean, one of my buddies was like, Fran, I was all excited about this Queller mid range list, and I've been doing well, but I just lost to this ridiculous Elemental deck, and then I saw it in your thing, and I'm like, that's the Elemental deck. I had no idea what he was talking about. And I don't think you'll ever see that in competitive play, but if it shows up, it like prides on control. Like that thing just destroys control. So you really can't plan for everything, but if you stay up with the metagame and MTG Goldfish or whatever, and you take the top 8, 10 decks and you have a plan to win against them, even if you lose, but if you have a plan for those decks, I think control is in a good spot. And it's one of those, even the best players will tell you, like, it's just one of those decks. If you understand it, you're a 50-50 deck across the format.
Right. And you know what? You really touched on something that we really rarely touch on in these interviews. I've interviewed many people, and that when you like maybe get into a deck, it is such an advantage to have a large card pool available, because you get that adaptability that, say,
Right.
Boggles really doesn't have. It's so rigid in what it can do. or at least maybe they haven't discovered their full toolbox. But really, when you buy into Boggles, you're buying into like 75 cards and maybe 10 extra cards after that.
Right.
And the decks that really stand the test of time are the ones that like a Titan decks, for example, have 1 million cards to pull from. So they've stood the test of time. Same thing with Jund, Death Shadow, and of course Blue-White Control. So when you think about dedicating yourself to a deck, make sure it has the adaptable card pool to adapt with Modern over time.
Right. So like that rule may not apply to Standard, right, or whatever, but in
Yeah,
Modern,
exactly.
so if you want a deck to last, and it's actually something that I've made into a joke over the years. It's like, I never have to worry about Blue-White having something banned in Blue-White because everyone's like,
all
oh,
these other cards.
I just built this deck and now I have to take it apart. But like, I've always loved Blue-White because it never had anything. I mean, with the exception of Jason, whatever, that were unbanned. Really, they didn't actually. Jason never saw play in Modern. I don't know if Stoneforge did. I don't think so because I think they were both banned around the same time, and so they never made their way into Modern. But I like the element of surprise. You mentioned this in your last episode too. Like you can approach Blue-White from like many different angles, so that when you play a Hollow Fountain or a Colonnade, you just, I mean, I can't really say anything better than what you said in the last episode, is that like you don't think about a Restoration Angel coming in, because it could be Fact or Fiction, it could be Cryptic Command, there's so many different things that can come when you see 4 mana untapped. And so when you want to turn the corner, you can do it with Restoration Angel, or you can disrupt and and pressure with Queller. I mean, there's different things you can do with Blue-White. And the thing is, it doesn't do anything so powerful where it feels broken. Except when you have a Teferi on the board. But there's these leverage plays, there's these ways to pivot, and ways to get your opponent to make mistakes, like a game of chess. It's really just trying to, that's the beauty of playing Control. It's like capitalizing on your opponent's mistakes. And that's why I love to play. I mean, it's the way I approach pretty much any other game that I play, whether it's video games or I love the ability to think outside the box and utilize those disadvantages and use them as opportunities to kind of play to your outs, right? And it's just challenging. I think it's made me a better player, and it's made me understand the game on a deeper level.
That's excellent. So let's say good morning to some people. Good morning, Clever Boy. Good morning, Simic Atlantis. Good morning, El Rodeo-san. Good morning, Siege Sensei. So if anyone has any questions, you can leave them below. We're going to talk with Azorius Sage for a little while, but afterwards we'll have some Q&A and some deck list reviews. So make sure you get ready. You get your Blue-White Control or Tempo Blue-White X decks ready for some review. So it'll be very, very, very interesting. So you are the writer of what is likely the largest primer that there is on Blue-White Control. And what I really like about this primer, I mean, I personally myself, I don't even have like a primer on the fundamentals of Merfolk, and probably I should get in on that for just starting in.
Yeah, it's good to have for any deck, honestly. It's just you see the almost like the core, like what makes the deck tick.
Yes, you can't master anything without the fundamentals. Go over what are the. By the way, if you're watching on the replay, we'll have a link to everything, all the Blue-White Control guide in the description below. So please go over with us, some things that you can learn in this Blue-White Control guide.
Sure, I'm actually going to refer to it right now because it's easier for anybody who also is following the primer here. But basically, in Control, there's some things that you have to utilize, and they're requirements, I feel, to improve as a Control player, but also just as a deck builder. Because if you understand these principles, you then look at your deck under a whole different light. Right, you start to see like, okay, well, maybe I'm not efficient enough. I like to help players in that area, especially because they may have all these powerful spells in their deck, right? And Control has a lot of top end powerful spells, but if you can't get the early interaction, the early stuff going, you're never going to get to get that part of the game, right? So I think a lot of the time is understanding, the most important aspect of Control, which is what makes the deck run, which is lands, right? Which is the efficient spells, like the interaction, the Path to Exiles. I mean, Opt recently has been controversial because even like Doom Switch, one of the greatest control players to ever play, in my opinion, in the game, even more than myself. I mean, he's he's like Mount Everest of of control. Yeah, I refer to him to like we're a lot of things. We go over a lot of different cards, and I inspire him. He inspires me. It's awesome. So it's a big knowledge pool. But as far as control, I think resource management is important. It's understanding that even your life is a resource. There's times when my archetype I play most is one of the ones with like mid-range approach, and so even when I play like a Wall of Omens, right? You may think like, okay, well, you're playing it to block and preserve life, but there's times when like I will literally, like, if it's not burn, I'll go down to like 6 life if I know I can turn the corner, and I'll utilize that Omens either as more value later on with Restoration Angel, or I would utilize it as the blocker against the last strong, because I know there are 2-3 guys in the beginning are not going to be the most threatening creatures. They're waiting to see what I do, and if that Omen just sits there and doesn't block, they're wondering, okay, well, does he not have removal? Why is he not killing my creatures? It's because I want him to overextend. I want to overextend so I can then swipe the board, and then Omens did his job. Or I want to be able to block and then path my Wall of Omens later on when I have path to grant myself. There's all these little intricacies, and I think that one of the key elements of playing control is understanding all the interactions between the cards. How Cryptic Command is a modal spell that does 4 or 5 different things throughout the course of the game, right? And now we have Archmage's Charm, and there's just so many cards that do multiple things. And when we later on in the show, when we delve into that mid-range list, Curry Wars, there are just so many players come to me all the time, like, Fran, there are so many lines of play in this that you really, I'd argue that it's actually more difficult to play that kind of deck when there's just way more options than there is playing control, where your goal is really to survive and get to a point where you can just lock the game up. Whereas in a deck like Curry Wars, you have many different pathways to to end the game.
And you're making reference, so anyone watching, he's making reference to a blue-white control list, which we can look at. We'll look at later when you're ready.
Sure. So yeah, resource management is important. Sequencing is important too. It's knowing like when to fetch for your land if you have a Jace, right? Or when to play your Serum Visions, or Opt. And I see a common mistake I see a lot too is players playing Serum Visions or Opt just because they have it. That's a common mistake. I don't like that at all. I feel like you will gain more equity value off your spells when you let your deck just draw naturally into what it's supposed to draw into. And then when you really know what you're looking for, what you need, then you play the Opt, right?
It reminds me of people playing Brainstorm when their hand is full of gas. Like, you're not looking for anything.
Yeah, the
only gas, and then when you run out.
I'm okay with players playing Opt or Serum Visions turn 1 is when you're in game 2, you know your matchup, you know what you're looking for. But as far as game 1, you should never have to pop that. And if you did, then you should have mulliganed, because you're probably looking for a land, and that's so that's my take on that. So yeah, resource management. Also, I'd argue this is the most important, and I'm going to stress this, and it sounds like I'm a broken record. My own mods and admins will say this, like, Frank, you just copy pasta everything you just said on Twitter, on the Facebook group, because this is so important to me. It is the reason why control is even relevant today, is because it is more proactive than it was ever. All right, we're playing way more to the board today than traditional old controllers where you're just draw go. Works sometimes in a known meta. Like if it's a local small event, you know what the metagame looks like. Draw go can be fantastic, off the top of draw go. But in modern, you need to be proactive. And that applies to control as well. So the difficulty, the challenge in control is, when do you hold up? When do you resolve? Right? When do you like allow yourself to be vulnerable to tapping out? And thankfully, a card like Teferi allows you to do whatever you want, without interruption. But I think being more proactive in control, if there's any takeaway today, if you're playing control, mid-range tempo, whatever list, is emphasize the ability to actually have a plan to win, not just lose. And that's something that control players have to like shift their perspective on, is like, yeah, drawing cards is great. Countering stuff is awesome, and you feel like you're in control. But modern, you're never in control for that long. There's not lantern control. You're not locking anybody up, unless you're doing like Cryptic Command and Sanctuary kind of thing. But
Just
you
a
know,
quick
even
shout out to Canister MTG, just rating us with 106 viewers. Thank you very much, everyone. Welcome. We are here with Blight Control Specialist, Azorius Sage, aka Neo, and we are going over all things Blight Control. We are just in the middle of learning the fundamentals of this archetype, so welcome. Get yourself a cup of coffee, cup of tea, and enjoy the show. All right, so you can continue.
Yeah, so I mean, you look at like some of the more successful lists. Since I'm going to go back to like where the primer is actually with Benny Hill's Blue White. You know, Modern evolved for Control when Shadow took over, right? When we were faced with these really efficient threats that were large, and then the whole community was like, "Wow, Wizards keeps printing these really efficient, powerful cards. That's even challenging Goyf, right?" And so, you know, something like Gurmag Angler or whatever, and I think that that's what Modern has become. It's forcing you to look at your deck and say, how am I going to respond to the board? Right? What does my deck do to respond to the board? And what am I doing for my opponent to respond to me? And a lot of times, Control now, it's like, well, can you deal with it? And a lot of times, it's more like, can we deal with that? But we've come to a place where Control now like lands threats like Teferi, where it's like, okay, now can you deal with this, right? And that's important. It's the turn 3 Planeswalkers changed everything for Control, but it didn't start really until you know, we got to the Fairy Narset, because, you know, Trials and all that, those weren't the blockers to do it. It was the ones where they actually allowed you to do what Control's always wanted to do, which was to be in control. And that's what that's what the Fairy does. The Fairy puts you in control, allows you to do what you want, for better or worse. But I think that being proactive in Modern is important. Having a plan to turn the corner is important. And if you're going to look at any deck that does this well, you look at a deck like Jund, where Jund, in a way, has control elements, right? Control doesn't necessarily mean you have counter spells, right? Control is just the ability to take away turns from your opponent and being able to be in a position of command, okay? And Jund does that, right? Once they disrupt your hand and take away your ability to play the game, they're in control. And that's the way you have to look at, you know, Control yourself, and whether it's Blue White, Bug, whatever you want to, you know, whatever you're playing as far as Control. And then you look at something like you know, Band Control, okay? The reason why it was so successful is because it was proactive, right? You have you have Uro, you had Kodal, you have all these things that, like, wow, I'm attacking in Control. That attacking is underrated. You know, like when I see this without Colonnade, it bothers me, but I understand. I mean, now it's okay to play 2, whatever. But when I see 0 and I see almost no way to turn the corner or pressure Planeswalkers, or, you know, the idea is like, oh, well, you know, there's removal. That's great, but we have Teferi. It can't be killed in combat, right? We have Sanctuary. Right. We have ways that can draw attention away from Colonnade, and Colonnade can just still turn the corner, right? So I think that turning the corner and role assessment, you know, being the beatdown, for example, you know, that's one of the most famous articles in '99 that came out of Mike Flores. Like, that is like it's in the primer, by the way, if you wanted to read it. It's the most important thing that any deck should adhere to is the ability to beat down when you need to and know what your role is in a matchup. I also, if you don't know, I also coach for Spikes Academy, and that tends to be, from my experience with students, that tends to be the most important takeaway, even in follow-up sessions where they come back with, you know, their results from, you know, the last lesson, and they say, you know, wow, knowing that I had a plan to actually win and knowing when it was the right time to turn the corner helped me win so many more games, and it made things less difficult. Because if you're just trying to control the game by, you know, countering whatever, and it doesn't lead to anything, but you have your face beaten, that is not control, right? Being in control is knowing, okay, now is the time. Now I can turn the corner. And when you have that kind of knowledge and that kind of knack for knowing that, then you're in the driver's seat.
Right. I just want to throw in there that coaching is very underrated still, even right now in the Magic community. Like, there are so many other games where coaching is, you know, common in any sport, tennis, hockey. If you look at chess, you get coaching. When I used to play poker, there was tons of coaching, and I'm flabbergasted how underrated coaching is looked at in Magic. But it definitely can help if you're a competitive player, you want to win. no matter what your goals are, you don't need to go to the Pro Tour. You could be winning your LGS. You could be trying to make day 2 of a GP, win the side events. Coaching can be a huge bridge to get you there.
I wanted to ask you a question, actually.
Sure.
When was the turning point for you when you realized, holy crap, I can apply more control elements in Merfolk? Because there was a time where you were playing Cryptic Command, and you were playing like, you literally you had also evolved Merfolk and realized like, wow, you know, I'm not just gonna take one route. I don't want to be this. I don't want to be shoehorned into one particular style of play. I want to be able to adapt, right, and throw them off. What got you to do that?
So what helped me a lot is that my very first deck that I ever played was just a mono blue permission deck. That's how I got into the game. So I actually was just a control player at heart, mono blue. And I recognized that I had to play similarly to this when I played mono blue devotion and standard. It felt very much like a creature control deck. And then when I got from my own mentor, Peter Sokorek, who basically showed me the ropes with Merfolk, one of the most important lessons he just learned, he says, you do what you have to do. You speed up when you need to speed up. You slow down when you need to slow down. He just outright said, this is not a aggro deck. He said it's more of a mid-range deck. And I even pushed even further to say, do you know what? This is even more of a control deck than a mid-range deck. I'm like locking things down with Tidebinder Mage.
Right.
I realized that, you know, the role with the key to winning with Merfolk was like to switch the role constantly pending the pending
that.
the
Yeah, I love that so much. I'm so passionate about that whole style of play that, like, look at that, I even have chills. Like that's how passionate I am about that, because you recognize that, like, it's not just about counterspell, it's not just about removal. It's like when your creatures are also controlling the game, you just added a whole new dynamic to the game where, like, for example, when you were telling me how you hate playing against Kitchen Finks, right? Do you know what kind of advantage it is when you're playing a mirror match and your control player says, I gotta keep Verdict in against a control deck? Like, what? Or
right, you know, that's awkward.
Keep in my paths. You're basically forcing your opponent to, like, not board the way they want. And it's the same thing with Merfolk. Like it's a mind trip to be able to play against a deck like that, where you're like, okay, well, are they gonna take their control elements out this game, or are they gonna? So when you give your opponent more to play with, and more to decide, and how to and you stretch their resources thin, you have an advantage in Modern for sure.
Absolutely. If you are, I think even with any deck, if you just have one role with this deck, you're leaving percentage points on the table. I remember seeing Burn win a GP by taking the control route against, like, I think it was like Abzan Company, because anyway, it was very interesting to watch this Burn deck just take a control route against them and not really go to the face or be too aggro. So if you have only one role against every archetype, no matter what archetype you are definitely leaving some percentage points on the table somewhere.
The only time I'm okay with that is if you're a combo deck and really you're like, let's say like Ad Nauseam, right? Or Storm, whatever. You have this one goal in mind, right? And you can afford to have one plan, because once you hit it off, it's done, right? But even a deck like Splinter Twin, when, you know, if that ever comes back to Modern, that'd be awesome. But if Splinter Twin, for example, well, actually, no, but Teferi can't be there, because that's just
Neo is pro Splinter Twin.
Yeah, pro Splinter Twin, but I'm not pro Splinter Twin with Teferi. That's just a whole another headache. So anyway, I think that even a deck with Splinter Twin, you have to account for decks to adapt, and I'll tell you why. When I first started this community on Facebook, it was because I came up with a deck that would beat Twin and Bloom. And players know this who follow me since 15, whatever. It was called Esper Twix. So if you want to look it up, Ali Antrazi was the first person to ever interview me about a deck. He thought it was cool. It was almost like a legacy deck, playing Meddling Mage in the main, Tidehall Sculler. And the whole idea was to turn 1 Thoughtseizure Inquisition, turn 2 Meddling Mage, like see your hand and call that card, then Tidehall Sculler, and like an Esper Charm, and then like leave you with no hand, and then have these little guys like 2/2s and 3/3s, right? And Geist Draft, like I remember it was at GP Charlotte in 15, and I showed up to round 7 late, lost game 1, and it was against like this mill deck, this black-blue mill deck. I won in 10 minutes, game 2 and 3, because it was literally like, okay, rip the hand apart, guys. I didn't board. It was just like, that was the plan. And so I had like a buff 70% win percentage against Twin. And at that event, the goal is I got to beat Twin, I got to beat Bloom. Those are like the 2 biggest decks at the time. And I played Bloom once, and I won 2-0 in 20 minutes. and I played the twin deck twice. It was a Jeskai twin, and it was a regular blue-red twin, and I won both 2-0, 2-0. It was like exactly what I lost against freaking fairies and burn and all the other Jund, but like I went there and I beat the decks that I wanted to beat, right?
Mhm.
And the idea is, again, the idea of being proactive, disruptive, and when a deck like Twin had no other plan except trying to get, Splinter Twin on a creature, if there's no alternative plan, and I would look at their decks afterwards, like, so what's your plan B? A lot of them didn't have a plan B. It was like, I gotta get Twin off, right? And I think every deck, even combo, even Ad Nauseam does it. Like out of the board, they're playing, some creatures, whatever. Like infected it with Geist out of the sideboard. It's like, oh, what? Now I'm not playing.
I saw some infect decks with Tarmogoyf before.
Right.
Very bizarre looking.
So as much as it may seem like you're diluting, right? If diluting the main game plan, if your deck can incorporate something without taking too much away from the game plan, where you're balancing it out in some other way, like it will literally give you percentage points against particular matchups, take it. Absolutely take it.
Absolutely. So do you have any like words of wisdom based on like all the different art? Your control guide goes over some fundamental things to think about between the different variations of blue-white
Right.
X decks, not just blue-white control, not just blue-white tempo. And would you put Stoneblade in its own category?
So for the sake of uniqueness, yes. However, as I mentioned in the primer, Stoneblade can be control. Stoneblade can be mid-range. But I think that, and I wish Goldfish would do this. They're a fantastic resource, but I think that they have their deck names completely. It's a disaster to me. And I think that can be improved. And it's hard. It's hard because Modern has become such a hybrid format. Like things are just doing whatever. Like it's
so many different versions of Uro.
Yeah, I would not be surprised to see like Merfolk humans soon. Like just like something like that's how players are evolving the format, evolving archetypes. Is just blending things together that work, right? And I think that with Stoneblade, it's just one of those things where like you look at these lists, you're like, yeah, that's mid range, or like, okay, that 10 creature control deck is Stoneblade. It has Stoneforge in it, right? Why is it not mid range? Right? So there's so many different overlaps, but I think the most important thing is that there are 3 main ways to build control, Azorius, and then there are subtypes of that variation, right? So there's, Azorius control. Under Azorius control, you have miracles. You have a combo variation with like knowledge pool and maybe Narset. And then you also have, Stoneblade with like, 6 to 10 creatures. That's still control. By the way, control does not mean 4 creatures. Control can be up to 10 creatures and still have, like you said with the Merfolk, you still have a control game plan. Like you're still a control deck. And a lot of players actually even look at like what's his name, Mitchell Forrest, and even Curry War, one of my favorite players, a Japanese player. His actual name is Takaya Sato, or Sato Takaya. And he said, like, when I first interviewed him, I don't consider this a mid-range deck. And I'm like, you have 16 creatures though. This is when it blew my mind. He's like, because every creature is also my utility. It's also disruption, like Click, exactly. Right? So I utilize them as my card advantage. But if I need to turn the corner and beat down, I can do that with them. And so they're part of the control plan. And like, what a luxury it is to have like, the Tide, what's that creature, the Merfolk, that also can disrupt, right? Where you have these utility creatures that do more than just attack. That's another way to view value cards, right? Like, what else is this card doing? Like, why does this board have timely reinforcements and not Core Firewalker? Well, because timely reinforcements has a bit more range of decks that it can play against, right? Without losing too many percentage points. But we are at a point right now, by the way, not going off too much of a tangent, that Core Firewalker may be that important to play in the sideboard.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of burn and prowess out there.
Right? So, but then again, these are things you have to, like, with experience, you learn like what the trends are in Modern, and you have the card pool ready to like, adapt. So yeah, as far as what you're saying, like the different types of decks, there's an article that I'd say is probably the most complex I've ever written. It's called Cracking the Modern Code, and I haven't mentioned it. I haven't put it in the resources section yet because I want to give other players. By the way, if you are a control player or mid-range player and you want to have one of your articles or write-ups or even Google Doc that has informative information for the archetypes, just tag me, let me know, and I will add it into the primer. I'm trying to make it like an open source kind of thing where I still am in control, but if players want to add things to it that are valuable in some section there, I will definitely add it. So I know there's some, like Doom Switch has offered his his expertise and insight. Skura, another great player, in front, right? There's a lot of great players who have given me different resources to go by, and one of the things that I really value is the ability to understand what the core denominator is between different decks, right? So like, even though, I'm going to just use card for the sake of examples. Yeah. You have like Infect Affinity, or, you have something like Burn, or you have whatever deck. Yeah, Prowess, right? You have, or that's a great example. Prowess, Burn, Blitz, whatever you want to call it, right? But they're all red aggro decks.
Yes.
Red, burn, okay. But then you have aggressive decks like, we'll call them a Shadow, because there's not as much burn there, but it could be one without any red at all. The point is, there are different variations of aggro, and the only time you would approach burn differently than, two aggro decks differently, is if it has burn spells, because now you have to realize that, like, going down to 1 against humans not the same, or 4 or 3 against humans not the same as going 3 against burn. So you have to acknowledge that. But when you have like big mana decks, like, the concept is they want to go over you, right? They want to. Yep. So what do you do? And this is actually one moment that helped one student. He booked 3 sessions with me, and each session he said that the most important takeaway to each one was that he realized that there was a deck he was having the most trouble with, and it was the Gruul midrange, right? And that's a difficult deck to attack for control. It actually is one of Control's most difficult matchups if you don't know what you're doing. They're attacking your lands. They're taking the ability away from you to play. Literally, what we discussed earlier, if Control doesn't have its lands, it can't play. And aggro decks can afford to lose. Yeah, aggro decks can afford to lose lands. They'll have like 1 or 2 lands. They can still function. Control can't function on that. So you take that away, you can't do anything. But what the most important thing to realize is that, do you counter the Blood Moon? Do you counter, the Arbor Elf? Or do you counter, what do you counter in a deck like that, right? You have to look at what makes decks tick. We're talking about the fundamentals, right? I hope you write that with Merfolk. That'd be awesome to read. Like, what makes Merfolk tick? What makes you want to play Merfolk, right? Or whatever. And so the thing with ramp, I'm just gonna call it ramp, is that if you take away the ramp, they're a slower, less broken deck, right? And it may seem like, oh man, like, why'd you waste your counter spell on like a ramp spell? Well, because if they're ramping, they're relying on that land or whatever they need to get off their Primal Titan or whatever it is. If you let them function at the same speed as you're going, you're going to have the advantage, because now instead you're accounting for turns 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 when they're going to have way more lands than you, and now you're not just worried about one Primal Titan, you're worried about Primal Titan and Scape Shift the same turn. Like, you can't handle both because you don't have that much mana. But if you stop the ramp early, you're attacking the deck's core fundamental plan to function, to allow everything else to work. So while all the other cards may seem scary, you actually are equipped to handle those cards. But you can't. You're not equipped to handle a deck that can play multiple spells at the same time, and you can only function on one-on-one. If you know your deck is a one-to-one removal, one-to-one disruption, that's why Jund has a hard time against decks that go wide, because they can't function on that axis, right? They're not prepared to handle that. So what are they going to do? They're going to try to stop the enablers. The enablers are the issue, not what brings out, what comes from the enablers. Those can be handled. So it's, they have 4 Blood Moons. Countering Blood Moon is not the issue. It's stopping the ramp early enough so they don't go over the top or under you.
Awesome. All right, so let's start taking some questions from the audience, and if always remember to either at Nikachu MTG or give me 3 question marks before or 3 question marks afterwards. Just a quick question: how much time do you have?
I'm free.
All right, excellent. It's gonna be a long coffee and MTG today. So Mikey J asks, can you ask Azorius Sage the best ways to play around sweepers? So this is basically asking for advice from the opponent's perspective.
Yeah, so I mean, the best way to play around sweepers is to actually not commit to the board and try to bait them into playing it too early. Or sometimes you have to sacrifice particular creatures for a bigger plan, right? So a lot of times, even when I'm playing my own decks that have creatures in it, I will apply the burn mentality, or like Goblin Guide for like the first 5 turns and not play anything else, right? Sculpt your hand. Aggro players, mid-range players, it's very important for you guys to also sculpt your hand, just like Control does, right? And see and get Control to actually commit. If they commit to that 1 or 2 creatures, you're in a good position. Okay, so if they have to verdict that 1 or 2 creatures, right, that's not value for them, right?
Mhm.
So what you want to do is try your best to get as much leverage out of your early threats as you can without committing to the board. Don't try to if you're playing Control, racing when you're not a burn deck isn't the best way to go. So don't try to plump everything on the board, because they will have a way to crush you once they swept the board and then recover, and then you're not in a good position, right? So having cards in hand and making a Control player think about what you have and try to play around other possibilities is a good way to play around sweepers. And I think that if you're playing humans, for example, they're super well equipped to handle Control without over committing to the board. And I think that you will be in a better spot if you don't play your best spells right away, or best creatures right away. Lead into that after they've responded to what you're doing. That's the only way you can really play around creatures. I mean, sweepers, unless you have a deck like black red Luros, where it doesn't really matter if they verdict, they're gonna shit's coming back later on, and
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter. So if your deck has that kind of inevitability and resiliency, then sweepers are not a problem. But if you're depending on what you have on the board, then absolutely don't overcommit. Not even if you see wall moments.
All right. So here's a really good question. How do you win the mirror with blue-white control?
So this is going to be a complex question to answer,
I'm sure you can
because
write a book about this by
yes,
itself.
yes. I think the most important thing in these matchups is you don't want Teferi to resolve. I mean, that is like the
Okay.
bane of that's the bane of Control's existence. Really, is a deck where you can't play your counters, you can't function, and so playing around Teferi is important. What I found is, generally speaking, you will do a lot of damage by playing a turn 2 Snapcaster Mage. If you're playing against Jeskai, it's a whole different story. You don't really want to do that because they have a bolt and there goes your snap. But when you're playing against blue-white, if the first to get snap and the first to get Teferi are in a really good spot. Teferi is not going
You
to
mean
win.
like snap with no value?
Snap no value.
So like
So
turn two,
turn
kill
two,
a creature.
turn two. Let's see what you're gonna do, right?
Okay,
So put the ball in their court and
gotcha.
start attacking with Snapcaster Mage. Now, what this does is it forces your opponent to act, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, they're beating me down. It's fine. They're not an aggro deck, but if they can't take out that Snapcaster Mage, what are they gonna start doing? They're gonna start trying to play spells. They're gonna start tapping out. They're gonna start playing what they don't want to play.
Even
Uh,
to path to exile, that thing is awkward because it ramps you up,
it
and
ramps you.
it's so important
Exactly.
in the control mirror.
You got it, exactly. And also, and if they have oust, they're not going to want to oust you, and then you gain more value with Snapcaster over another spell. So the key is to be the beatdown in the control matchup with Snapcaster Mages. That's why, like, I never not play with snaps, because they're important whether you're playing against Tron, right? Like playing against Tron and trying to go like, and I'm going to use an example because I still consider Tron a control matchup as well. Even against Tron, if you're just using snaps like Snap Cryptic, or no, you want to apply pressure as early as you can, because they're a control deck too in their own way, and they have a better late game than you do. And you don't know what kind of late game your control player, your opponent has, right? They might have a better late game than you do. So the key is you have enough control elements to control the game, but force them to make mistakes. And Snapcaster Mage is one of the easiest ways to make mistakes. So is Vendilion Click. So those are good ways to force your opponent into a position they don't want to be in. And if they have to path you, like you said, it's a good spot to be in. If they have to literally verdict your Snapcaster Mage, that's an incredible spot to be in. Yeah, definitely apply pressure. I think historically, one of the best creatures against control is Geistling Trapped, Monastery Mentor. Those are fantastic creatures because they're like, okay, this guy is playing creatures now, and you have to respond. You can't sculpt your hand. One of the best ways to control a game is to take turns away from your opponent. And if you apply that early on with Snapcaster Mages, you're in the driver's seat.
Right. Here's a very good question for a lot of people looking to get into blue-white control. Is blue-white control hard to play if you're just getting into the deck?
I'd say yes. I mean, I started off when I first started playing Magic. I played some kind of variation control. The player who actually taught me to play, believe it or not, was a Shadow player, and this is 2010 now. We're talking about like Hellspark Elemental, Blightning, you know, those kind of cards. And I was thrown to the fire right away. If you're playing control for the first time, play against a deck that actually challenges you aggressively. Burn, Shadow. That's my advice, because it forces you to act. It forces you not to be passive. And in Modern, you can't be passive, right? You have to be proactive. And when you're dealing with threats right away, it shapes the entire like future of your career with control in the format. Because even like the mid-range decks, like that play Thought Seer or whatever, like they hit the board so early because of their ability to ramp that you're forced to constantly deal with the board. So I feel like if you're playing control for the first time, it's complex if you're just playing against other control mirrors and whatever. But I feel that you will gain a lot more insight and experience playing against aggressive decks that challenge you and force you to think outside the box. Like, okay, how do I deal with this situation? And then you start to look at the card pools and the dynamics of playing stuff like Wall of Omens to fend off and save off some damage, whatever. And that's why you understand, like, oh, that's why Wall of Omens is played. You know, so I think, and also threat assessment is very, very important. If you don't know, as a control player, if you don't know what's threatening and you're just randomly throwing counter spells and removals at things,
right,
you're not gonna be in a good spot. So
yeah, you need to line up the right spells with the right threats.
Right. So if there's any piece of advice, playing control, yes, it is difficult, but it will be easier for you to become accustomed to the way to play control if you understand what's threatening. And one of the best ways to do that is to identify what other decks' primary threats are, secondary, and third, if there are any third. And then you'll start to learn which spells, how to utilize your resources. And then obviously always apply the philosophy of turning the corner, you know, a role assessment, basically, knowing that like against Tron, you're not the control player.
Exactly. Okay, does Neo find 3 mana Teferi a fun and or healthy card for format? You're a philosopher. All right, so what's your philosophy on, you know, should this card exist in Magic?
I think Teferi is one of those cards that is good for control, but terrible to play against, right? So it does what control wants to do in a format that you really don't have inevitability as control player. You just don't, right? There's just too many ways for decks to climb out of a hole that you put them in, that if you can't close fast enough, you're not going to have the outcome that you're looking for. Teferi allows you to do a lot more with control than you couldn't do before, but I don't think it's a particularly healthy card for the format. This is the objective perspective.
Yep.
Do I want it out? No, because I play mid-range. I don't want that deck to die. And that's the only reason why the deck even exists, is because Teferi allows it to be. But to be fair, I think that there are decks that are not control that utilize Teferi, that want to go combo, or, you know, makes it very difficult to interact with creatures. Believe it or not, even though Teferi's in a control deck, Teferi with creatures is a nightmare, because you just can't interact with their stuff during your turn. As a control player, that's not a good position to be in, especially
good luck Cryptic commanding my team down.
Yeah, not gonna happen. And when it's only one white, a deck like Merfolk can splash for Teferi.
Yeah, it's so easy to splash this card.
Yeah, it's very easy to splash. And when something is that powerful and that splashable, I think it's not healthy for the format, because then you basically have to, when a deck forces every deck to change the way it's built, that's unhealthy for the format. And I think Teferi is right up there. The only way I can see Teferi staying in the format is if there's like an errata in the rules or something that changes the way things function, or there's another card that comes out and basically shuts down like planeswalker abilities, and it's like, okay,
Yeah, like something that says like all planeswalkers in play lose all abilities, or
yeah,
something like
that's fair. And it also has to be a splashable card. Can't just be for one deck. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. So I think it's 60-40. I'm going to put in favor of that.
Right. Here's a great question. How do you determine the right blend of removal and counter spells to play in a specific tournament?
So when you say specific, is it a tournament that's small scale or large scale? I mean,
Let's talk about both, but I'm assuming it's like okay, we can talk about both, but I'm assuming it's like your local game store between like 30 and 50 or something like that.
Right, and a lot of times, the first thing the players will see when you look at a control deck is, oh my god, that's so few counter spells. But you look at a deck like, if you have no experience with this deck, look at like a Benny Hills early on control when Shadow and Etron took over the format, or Eldrazi Winter took over the format, right? Playing counterspells was like the worst thing you could do, because they would just rot in your hand and they'd be irrelevant if you drew them. And you wanted to play cards that actually were live and active with onto the board, right? That can respond.
Play to the board at this time.
Playing to the board, like if you're building control today, always emphasize playing to the board before playing counterspells. But that's not to say you don't play with counterspells, but I would not fill your entire deck with draw go elements like drawing and countering. That's not what place to be. The ratio I like removal to counters is typically 1-to-1, like a balance. Having like 4 paths, 2-3 verdicts. Some players play oust, whatever. But I do think that you don't want to have like 10, 12 counterspells in your main. Maybe in your 75, that's totally reasonable. But I think that depending on your local format, if it's like really, really creature heavy based, play more removals than counterspells. If it's like a blend of both, then make it a 1-to-1 ratio. And then if there's like more combo and Tron and whatever, then yeah, do 2-to-1 ratio in favor of counterspells to removal. But I think for an open tournament like a GP or a big event, go 1-to-1 ratio, keep things balanced. It's the same idea as playing a time reinforcement over a core firewalker. Don't go all in on one particular, kind of keep yourself versatile.
Yeah, we've had a lot of guests on regarding Blight control and the counter spells, and counter spells, as a lot of control players have been like complaining about for years, is that things are more uncounterable than they ever have been before.
That's another factor too.
Cavern of Souls, Ether Vial, things are more efficient, so like it's hard to counter everything in one.
One of the reasons why Archmage Charm and Cryptic are played a lot now is because they're not just counter spells; they do other things. And I think like even though it's narrow, I still think that like Mana Leak is a fine 2-mana counter spell. If you a lot of times you open up with Mana Leak and 2 lands, it's a keepable hand. But as far as counter spells in general, I like it between 6 to 8. That's my range, and that's also taking into account that there's also cards to draw into your counter spells, right? So if you have like very, very, very little draw in your deck, then play more counter spells because you want to be able to see them. But if you have more draw ability, then or you have more Snapcaster mages, you don't need as many because you have the ability to replay them. You have the ability to see them more. That's the way I would approach it.
So quick follow-up question: when would that person want to be more heavier on the counter spells? What kind of metagame does that look like if they're
like I said, it has to be more combo, more big mana. That for sure. Then you want to kind of switch it around. But even then, I wouldn't play more than 10 counter spells in the main.
Okay. So capped at 10. Why not add green for Uro? Tell us a little bit what you think about Uro.
Oh no, there's no reason not to. I mean, if you want to play that version, I think it's actually the superior way to play control right now. Simply because it's a house. I mean, you have such an efficient threat. And you can also really just play what Bant was prior to Astrolabe and still be fine, honestly. And there's other ways you can. I've seen versions with Field of Ruin now, and it's like now you have basically blue-white with Burrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's I think bans argue the best, and this is actually after speaking to Doom Switch. We have some differences in what we think are important right now in terms of like valuable cards that are for blue white, but ultimately you're doing a disservice to you're doing a disservice to yourself right now in this metagame if you're playing just blue white control. I'd recommend ban over blue white. However, if you're playing something like Curry Wars list, it's a whole different dynamic. It's a whole different story. Even Mitch Force that I recommended last week or a few days ago is not as good a position as Curry Wars.
Let's take a quick look at this Currywurst list. Can you put a link in the chat? Where's Currywurst list? And
yeah, I'll bring it up real quick. So
then I can share it with everyone.
And the only reason that is honestly is because it can handle the Luro decks, the power decks better. And Finks may seem like an outdated card. Let me tell you, like it's not what it used to be at all. And this is like multiple years over. It hasn't been what it is. But you have to also look at cards in the context of their design. That's something very important I want players to understand right now is like you have to look at a deck's design concept and what it's trying to do. And these cards accrue more value. Sorry, I'm just put it in here real quick.
Yeah, so we can all see.
Chat, right there. Should be good. There you go.
Yeah. There we go.
So what's important to understand is that something like Kitchen Finks, when you utilize it as part of your verdict plan, when you're going Wall of Omens turn 2, Kitchen Finks turn 3, then you sweep the board with a Supreme Verdict, you recover, you reset and recover with something like Restoration Angel or Jace the Mind Sculptor. Kitchen Finks now becomes a lot more problematic, like Nikachu was saying. Like you have a lot more issues with Kitchen Finks in a deck that is taking advantage of its persistability and plays a card like Verdict where it doesn't care if it goes away, right? So this particular deck is in a good position also is because it's playing 4 Force Negation, right, for the big mana and some of the combos, and also honestly even like the fast starts from like Dredge and Burn and whatever. So like it forces a good card, but it also plays Spreading Seas, and this is where Doom Switch and I have a difference. He doesn't think it's a good well-positioned card. He thinks Tron is seeing a downswing, but Spreading Seas is also a card that is undervalued against decks that are operating off playing multiple spells the same, like chaining multiple spells.
Right.
And when you're taking one of those lands away and they're not playing a lot of lands, like a deck like Black Red, right? You're really throwing them off. And I learned this from Benny Hills. What made his blue-white control list so popular back then is because he said that like this card was making this guy, I'm talking Benny Hills was averaging like 75% win ratio on MTG. Like he was a leading trophy. It was insane. Like people were like, who is this Benny Hills guy? And he was just dominating with Spreading Seas. And like it was basically Spreading Seas into tapping out, like playing Planeswalkers and whatever, Wall of Omens, and playing to the board. Spreading Seas is a proactive card that takes your opponent's ability away to play what they want to play. Now, when you're chaining Spreading Seas and you're playing Field of Ruin, you're taking a lot of their ability to function away. So this deck is a little bit of everything, which I like. It even incorporates Cryptic Command and Sanctuary. I mean, it's got a little bit of everything mixed in those 80 cards. And I like that he's playing redundancy. He's playing a lot of 4Os, 3Os because there's a lot more cards, so you want to be able to see everything. And if you ever want to learn like why they're playing 3 of this or 2 of this, you have to look at redundancy. You have to look at cards that also have very similar roles and abilities, and that's why you would look at that card as like the 4th of something or the 5th of something, even though some does something a little bit different. And also the converted mana calls like Restoration, is a 4-drop. You don't really need 4 of them, but you need them enough to see them.
This is an 80 card deck, remember, because this is
right.
a
So like
companion deck.
Yeah, so seeing like Vendilion Clique, for example, as a 3 of is not really necessary if you're playing control, 1 to 2 max. But in a deck with 80 cards, makes sense to have 3. And also just the ability to constantly look at your opponent's hand is, in my opinion, one of the most undervalued, underappreciated aspects of playing control. a control player who knows what your opponent is playing just gained like 20%, 30% advantage on the matchup, because now your opponent is forced to play around what you know. And in the information also informs your sequencing, which is one of the most important things for a control player. The equity of your counter spells, knowing what exactly you're going to counter, what's worth countering, what's worth holding for, and also just knowing that it could be the difference between resolving a Jace now or 3-4 turns later on, right? That information that Click provides is invaluable. Now take Click's disruption ability and combine it with Restoration Angel, and you have the draw step nightmare for Tron situation where Tron plays off top of their deck, and good luck trying.
Speed.
Good luck trying to do that in a deck where I'm constantly looking at the top of your card and saying nope, can't play it. And what that does too is it pushes away the more difficult cards to interact with. Let's say a card like Thought-Knot Seer, where they have counter souls, you can't counter it. Push the Thought-Knot Seer, let them keep Karn, because you can counter it.
Yeah.
So that's the way this deck functions. There's so many intricate pieces of this deck and lines of play that I find that it really can't be just like it's hard to hate it out. I think you mentioned this last time too. You can't really just like have a plan against this deck. It's like you can't be like, okay, well, I got this and I'm going to shut down your graveyard. Or no, it plays 2 Snapcaster Mages. It's not really playing off the graveyard. And Kitchen thinks if you shut down the graveyard, that's fine. There's many more creatures in this deck to soak up life and damage. You know what I'm saying? So I think this is a really well positioned deck, and even something like Yorion, Sky Nomad, when we were talking about redundancy and cards that do multiple things the same way, Yorion brings back Spreading Seas. Teferi can bounce Spreading Seas. You even have something like Cryptic Command that can bounce Spreading Seas and put on something else. I mean, you have multiple cards that are all interacting with each other. And I think that's something you have to understand too, like Spring Verdict. It's a deck that doesn't care about it, but if you do want to save Restoration Angel, you can Teferi bounce your Restoration Angel, then wipe the board, or you can Jace, the Restoration Angel. There's just so many aspects of this deck that it balanced. We look at the way he balanced these creatures out too. He didn't play Spell Queller because he's playing Supreme Verdict, but instead he's playing let's just look at this real quick. You're looking at 4 Wall of Omens and 3 Kitchen Finks. That would be considered the angle of deck that handles aggro, those fast decks, burn, whatever, right? And then you have to balance that out with decks that are combo and big mana and control. So he's got 2 Brazimars, 3 Venom Clicks, and 2 Snapcaster Mages for the counter spells and whatnot, right? To put a clock on the board, right? Yeah. So maybe Wall of Omens and Kitchen Finks might not be relevant against Tron, but this deck then balanced that off by playing 9 or so flash creatures, where you're able to turn the corner if you need to. And in fact, I almost think that this is almost I don't think it's quite perfect, but for what it is, and I'm not even saying that for what it is, it's better than anything else, but for what it is the way this deck was designed is as good as it's going to be. This really incorporates all the most important things. He even has that Spell Snare down as one, because it's one of the most important cards right now. He even put 2 of those in there. I think that this is a good example of a deck that really knows what it is, and it plays to its strengths. And I think that this is the way you would build a mid-range Yorion deck. So much so that if you are familiar with JB 2002, he's Junichiro Bendo. He actually inspired Yuya Watanabe to play the blue-white deck at Worlds, which had Dragon Lord Jutai, Omens, Resto, Kitchen Finks, all that. And he even said he played Curry Vor's list. And it's funny because Curry Vor was inspired, another Japanese player inspired by JB. JB's been playing that kind of deck since like 2002. But he actually said this deck is near perfection for what it is, because it may look like you're playing outdated cards, but altogether it's a deck that just ticks.
It's a wonderful list. It's a beautiful list. All right. Whoops.
And that's to answer your question. Yes, if you're playing control, I think Uro is the way to go. If you're playing blue-white right now, you want to play more to the board.
Here's a good question. What control deck do you recommend for Pioneer?
And might
be a difficult question to answer right now because Pioneer just sort of got reinvented.
Right. But I will say this though, I'm not I'm not really well versed in Pioneer. I dedicate so much of my energy and resources into Modern that I really don't know what's going on too much there. In fact, I almost lost a student because they wanted Pioneer and they segued into Modern, right? And that was a 3-session player actually. Really, it was difficult for me to really comment on Pioneer, but I will direct you to someone who does. It's Benny Hills. If you go to Benny Hill's channel, Benjamin Hill, he has a lot of content on Pioneer. He's been doing really well. I think he's showed up in dailies also.
He's mentioned in your primer, right?
He is mentioned in the primer, yes. I think his YouTube channel is there too. He recently talked about how he thinks control is broken in Pioneer, even without like Teferi. Like that, he's designed such a good list, and I think that's where you want to base it off of. Look at Benny Hill's list and kind of, one suggestion I have for a lot of players. Now I'm filling in a lot today, but I think it's a great opportunity for players to really get the most out of this. I think the one thing is never take the list that a player has put a lot of time into and just tear it apart to do your own stuff. Understand first why a deck is the way it is, and then after experiencing for yourself, tailor parts of it to either fit your play style or the metagame. But to understand the way a deck works and the ins and outs of it, if it's an established deck that a player has put time into and performed with it, play as is. And I think that's a good way to start in Pioneer with Benny Hill's list.
And here's a good follow-up question. I love Blight control in Pioneer, so maybe Okio should have asked Perfect Blue for his list or their list. But I hate Azorius Charm. I feel that Blessed Alliance is better. What are your thoughts?
I mean, if we're talking about the life gain aspect of this, it really comes down to how much equity you're getting out of Azorius Charm's life gain with your creatures in your deck. If you're not, and you value more the draw ability, then I'd say that's a better place to be. But I'll argue that Blessed Alliance, being able to remove a creature off the field and also gain 4 life unconditionally, is probably better. Like you said, Azorius Charm is good if you actually have creatures also, and surprise, lifelink. I mean, that's awesome. But if you're just doing it for the cantrip or bouncing a creature, I don't know if it's as good as playing. Plus, the requirement of having blue and white mana for Azorius Charm, as opposed to white and any color for Blessed Alliance.
Here's a very interesting discussion I'd love to hear about. Thoughts on Opt versus Serum Visions versus Omen of the Sea?
So Opt and Serum Visions, actually, I'm glad you asked, because I have an entire guide on Opt versus Serum Visions, and then I actually will, we can share it in the chat later on, or I can bring it up to you now. But basically, the short version is Opt is optimal when you have a deck that has more instant speed spells. So if you're playing more off, playing reactively, and that you can opt into a Cryptic Command or opt into Archmage's Charm or whatever, then absolutely Opt is superior. But also Opt is better with with Jace, when you put things back on top of the deck and you're able to like instant speed grab that card and like, what I mean. So like Opt is fantastic in that sense. If you want to dig a little deeper, I think Serum Visions is great, but Serum Visions is better when you're playing a more tap out style. If you look back at the day when Benny Hills was playing, Serum Visions is the deck you want to play in a deck like that, because you're playing Spreading Seas, you're playing Planeswalkers, you're playing creatures. How much are you going to actually gain of playing an Opt, right? Like what advantage are you going to have by playing? Oh, you might draw that path, off the Opt. And so I think also the more Snapcaster Mages you play, the better Opt is. Because instant speed, 3 mana with the Opt is great, with Snapcaster Mage. But ultimately, here's another example. We're playing a deck like Splinter Twin, right? Hypothetically, you're trying to set up something. Serum Visions is better. And like setting up a particular sequence or setting up a particular interaction of 2 cards together, Serum Visions is better. That's why you see a lot of combo decks also play Serum Visions as opposed to Opt. But Opt is really good if you're playing at more instant speed. You have more Snapcaster Mages. As far as Omen of the Sea, it's sort of like in the Serum Visions route for me. But it's more valuable in a deck of Miracles. You know, the scry ability is great. I think that of the three, though, I think Omen of the Sea is the least. And I think it's more, when it first came out, actually, it was being compared more to like, oh, like, well, Omen's 2 cards, body, draw a card kind of thing. And trust me, efficiency is key. Sorcery speed, 2 mana. I don't know if that's really want to be. I would still focus, if you're playing control, on opt in order: opt, Serum Visions, Omen of the Sea.
Awesome. Very interesting. And I noticed, like, when Opt came out, eventually it like quickly replaced Serum Visions. Can you give us maybe a little bit of insight about like Doom Switch's dropping of Opt?
Yeah, you just remember mine. That's exactly what I was going to say.
There's like, instead of, it should be like Opt versus Serum Visions versus Omen of the Sea versus nothing.
Versus nothing, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of, and you know what? He's not the only one. Skura, Answer Front, has also historically hated playing any cantrips. Would have, in fact, his prior to before Oko, he had one of the best blue-white control lists, like before things shifted big time, and he was playing like 1 or 2 ops, but he played. But here's the caveat: when you play less ops and less cantrips, you definitely can't skimp on lands. You have to play your 25 lands at least, okay? And this goes for control at least. And you also want to make sure that you're not playing too many one-ofs. So with less card selection, you can't play as many one-ofs, right? Or two-ofs, a card that you want to see more often by the mid-game. So I'd argue that while Opt isn't a great card by any means, especially in a list where because he's playing the Bant list, and in Bant there's just a lot more action. Okay, there's a lot more value that you're accruing already through the deck, even early draws, right? Like I think his philosophy is that I'd rather have something that will ramp me, like Growth Spiral will ramp me and draw a card or whatever. Like something like I think he was playing at the other time. He was playing the one that like Phoenix was playing, the red-green one. I forget what the name of that card is right now. But yeah, he was playing that, even though it's 2 mana because it's instant speed. But it does more than just draw and scry 1, right? But I think that only holds true for Bant control. Don't apply that to white-blue. I think it's a different, you know. Now, that's not to say you can't split your ops and Serum Visions. I've seen that happen too. I've seen, you know, if your deck is like a 50-50, you know, tap out and you could do 2 ops, 2 Serum Visions, right? They don't make or break your deck, but they do glue it together.
Right. So it sounds like you can forego these cantrips if you at least have like other cantrip-like cards in the deck.
Right.
That already have utility attached anyway.
Yes, and I'll use this as an example. A time when you don't actually need Opt or Serum Visions or whatever is a deck that's playing 4 Walled Omens, and you're more mid-range. You've got more creatures, right?
Yeah.
You don't really need to draw your cards when the value, the card advantage you're gaining is on the battlefield.
Gotcha. Great discussion. If anyone's watching on the replay, don't forget to give a like to this. This is a great discussion we're having about blue-white control. So this might be a weird question. Is it more from Pride of the Wolves? Is it more about the deck or about the player? So they give the example: is a pony with a Jund deck more likely to crush a tournament than with a Merfolk deck? And how much is it really about the cards? So I would say yes, a Jund player would more likely win a turn if you take a Jund player and a Merfolk player and they have no experience in Modern. I think the Jund player is at a huge advantage because the individual card power of each of those cards in the Jund deck is just going to overwhelm the individual card power of the Merfolk deck. And planlessly, the Jund player will definitely win. So in terms of the card power level, like how much do you think it is about the cards with control?
So yes, I mean, if you're taking a deck that we're going to use like a Doom Switch list, right? And I'm going to use it with the one that won a GP. Okay. Factually, Azorius is only one GP ever, and it was based on Doom Switch's list. Austin Bursavich was the one who actually won the GP in Dallas, right? He didn't change 1 card in that list. He said he hardly even play tested the list. He just brought it to the tournament and says, "Hey, Doom Switch is doing really good with this. I'm a good player. I'm gonna run it. He's used to playing control. It's not like he had to like relearn an archetype or anything. He just played the best cards and said he wouldn't change one thing. The deck was perfect the way it was, right? So yes, a lot of times it is, the deck just ticks. It just the cards just work together, and you don't really want to change too much. But that's a rare exception when it comes to control. I'd say that control is more so about the player. I can give a control deck that I built to a player who just started, and they would do so many things wrong, because not because they're not good players, but because they have no experience with the deck and they don't understand. Like if I give them the mid-range list with omens, do they know that you can path your omens to ramp yourself to your verdict? You know what I mean? Like, do you know that you can Snapcaster Mage so you can ramp, you can path your Snapcaster Mage and then ramp yourself? Like, there's things like that you might miss. So I do think that while, like you're absolutely right, Jund would be the optimal choice for a tournament if you're just going blindly.
Yeah, vacuum knowledge, vacuum environment.
But I do think that Modern rewards players who learn the ins and outs of their deck and update that deck through the motions of the Modern metagame. They have that kind of leverage, that experience where they understand, that me applying, my knowledge to this matchup will gain me more equity than just blindly playing a deck that's good. You know what I mean? And not knowing how to actually engage the matchup. So that's, in my opinion, it depends on the kind of deck it is in control. More often than not, it's about the player.
So here's a really interesting question. We sort of addressed it by looking at that Currywurst list, but like I showed up kind of late. Should Blue-White X Control be playing Yorion as a companion? So maybe like we know that it can be used as a companion, but how about this? Like, should by default every Blue-White or Blue-White X Control deck be running Yorion?
No. I think that a control list that's playing more than 60 cards is not a good place to be, in my opinion.
Okay.
I think that, the fact that you're mostly relying on interaction and planeswalkers to win the game more often than not, Yorion doesn't bring as much value to the table as a deck like Currywurst, where it plays with the creatures. You know what I mean? It plays with the creature plan. The deck has control elements, don't get me wrong, but it is a beatdown deck first, which, by the way, is the reason why you'll often see more colonnades in a creature-oriented blue-white than a control list, because colonnade plays off the fact that removal are going to go to the face of other creatures, and it might dodge removal, right? Or if you need a last bit of damage, colonnade will provide that. So Yorion's kind of the same idea. In fact, I argue I play Dragon Lord or Jutai for 5 mana first before I play Yorion in a control deck. Unless, of course, you're incorporating some kind of combo that I'm missing in a control deck. But I think that, card advantage and card quality is so important in control that, like, just giving yourself more cards, don't think really the payoff isn't great.
Even if you balance the ratios? Because, I mean, we saw a lot of Yorion until the companion changed. Now this 3-man attack seemed to be like a really big deal.
Yeah. I think before it was in a better position. Right now, I just, and this is after also addressing this with other control players. Like, it's efficiency is key, right?
Okay.
And so for control, especially efficiency is key. I would just stick to, the 60 cards, keep Yorion out of the equation. But if you want to play Yorion and really, really take advantage of what it can do with its enter the battlefield abilities, play the Currywurst list.
Gotcha. So Yorion is just not free. It is not free to play. I don't know if you'll have an answer to this. What are the best for turning the corner in Historic?
Yeah, not for me, unfortunately.
All right, next question. What's your favorite third color to play alongside blue-white? What's your favorite X?
My favorite X actually is Esper. It's
wow.
Yeah. I think it's no, it's not optimal. Obviously, if I'm gonna play anything Esper, it's gonna be something like Shadow, or Mentor, or Stoneblade. I'm not gonna play Control. But I think that the one that I can get behind and I like a lot is Bant. Bant does a lot of things I like. If you guys aren't familiar, I actually created a Bant deck It was in 2017. It was Bant Wish. There's articles on that too if you would like to see it. This is before Teferi, but it was the idea of adapting to Modern's metagame by being able to turn 2 Meddling Mage game 1 off your sideboard against Storm or Ad Nauseam,
Right.
you know, and just being able to adapt. And so Glittering Wish was the key card. I've had players experiment now with Teferi, going like end of turn Glittering Wish because you can instant speed it, you know, instead of playing it, you know, sorcery speed, and then having their sideboard full of like multicolored, because there's just been even better multicolored cards been released since I made that deck in 2017. So I'd say like green is nice because I do like playing creatures, and Bant provides a lot of creatures. So historically, I like Esper, but I think today I actually am more Bant. You know, all time is probably Esper for their color.
Excellent. So I think now is a good time. If anyone has any control lists that you want to get some feedback on, I think now is a good time. Go ! Deck review. Don't leave any spaces, people, or it's not going to be part of the pool of decks. And then you can leave your link and any comments about the deck that you want to get some feedback on. We've got the Blue-White Specialist here. So if you're looking for some feedback on your deck, now is a good time to put it in. And while we wait for your deck list to get submitted, your list will be drawn randomly from the pool of deck lists that have been submitted.
And if your list isn't chosen, I always, like I said, we can also link the Spikes Academy coaching for booking. Yeah. You can always book a session with me, even half hour, to go look over your list. I'm more than happy to.
So, well, I guess I can have this up. And so let's answer some questions while the lists are being submitted. Is Essence Scatter positioned well in Modern?
And Pioneer.
Yeah, and Pioneer.
Yeah, so, I mean, no. I'd still play a more versatile counterspell than something that hits creatures. You know, it's like, to me, I look at that card the same way as you look at the card that was like Snapcaster Mage, but it's only a spell, right? Why Snapcaster Mage? Great, because it's also a body. And I think you have to apply that philosophy also to Essence Scatter. Like, don't get me wrong, if you're playing in like a known metagame and there's no Cavern of Souls, there's no, you know, whatever, like, sure, Essence Scatter, oh, I got your Primal Titan, that's awesome, right? But overall, I'd say that you're gonna want to see like a Logic Knot or a Mana Leak way more often, you know, than just an Essence Scatter.
Right. In your opinion, how does Blue Tron compare to Blue-White Control? Is there any advantage to playing Control Tron?
There are some advantages for sure. You know, I've seen there's actually a player who's really, really well versed. Because I don't really have much experience with Blue Tron, but I've seen what Blue Tron can do. And it's basically, I've even seen Blue-White Tron. And Blue-White Tron is basically Blue-White Control with Colonnades and Karn. It's like, you know what I mean? So talking about like mixing hybrids, you know, put decks together, that's one that actually can, I've even seen like Blue-White Gifts Tron. You know what I mean? With like Elish Norn, and so there are multiple ways.
I haven't seen that in like 7 years, but yeah,
I know.
remember
There's
that.
actually a player. His name is Richard John. If you catch him on Twitter, he's really good with Blue Tron, Blue-White Tron. The only advantage you get is that you're able to go, you know, over the top of some of the more mid-range lists. You know, and I think that even in the control mirrors, you might have an advantage. But you actually sacrifice some interaction also because you're playing other spells to ramp and things like that. So I don't think you're as good of a control deck, but you're really good at, you know, having more action, having more threats.
This is a great question. What do you think of Field of the Dead in Control? Is it the right way to play Control?
It's a good question. I actually have not experimented with it. You know, I actually have just recently come back from hiatus, if you guys didn't know, since January. So there's still some things left untouched, unexplored. That could be one of the things that we can look into. You know, we control players have even tried putting Thought Seer in their deck. You know what I mean? Like, oh, let's try to jam this thing, and you know. So I think it's probably worth exploring, but I can't really comment on it because I've never done it. I don't know how to. You know, here's the problem: you're competing with other lands already to tight space in Blue-White's land base. Okay, you're talking about where like colony used to be like the most important other land besides fetch lands and your dual lands. Well, now colony has dropped to like number 2, number 3. Like it, you know, you're playing Mystic Sanctuary, Field of Ruins are like more popular today than, you know, a colony. And now you're trying to put Field of Dead in there too. It's the tough squeeze. And I think to really gain the leverage off that card and control, I don't think you're going to see it.
I don't think I've been paying attention very closely, but I think it's the teamer lists that are running Field of the Dead.
Yeah, I think it's the one. I got some same boat as you. I haven't really seen it besides
I think it was just played against me recently.
I actually think Doomswitch is playing it in Ban.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, you can take a look.
Try.
We could pull it up. And they're playing 2 of, I think. I think Doomswitch is on 2. But again, you know, you've got a list. His version is also ramping. You know, so you can't just jam it in your deck. You have to also build to support it.
All right, let's get ready for some deck lists. Hey, where's my? I didn't have my branding up the entire time. Whatever. Okay, so all right, let's time for some deck list review. So everyone submitted their deck list for the most part. So when are you gonna get picked at random? We've got Thai Iced Tea's deck list has been chosen. And if it's not control, I'm skipping it. It's not charitable to our guest. All right. So here's our list.
Okay.
I'm assuming, yeah, this is modern. We have 4 Ice Fang Quaddle, 2 Snapcaster Mage, 4 Uro, 2 turn 3 Teferi, 2 Jace, 1 Teferi Hero of Dominaria, 4 Path, 1 Snare, 4 Thought Scour.
Thought Scour, yes, that's interesting here.
1 Ether Gust, 2 Mana Leak, 3 Force Negation, 3 Cryptic Command, 2 Supreme Verdict, and
the mana base looks solid. It's not bad.
So 25 lands. All right. So first off, what's your takes on the main deck? Anything that stands out? Anything?
Yeah, let's go down to the lands one more time. Actually, I want to take a look at something.
Let's take a look at the mana base.
Okay, so off the bat, I don't think this list. I'm gonna scroll back up. Actually, don't think this list really takes advantage of Ice Fang. I don't think it's the right list for Ice Fang. But it's a threat. You know what I mean? It's flash. I mean, the snowlands is fine. But I just don't think Ice Fang is where it was before. I do like it in Stoneblade. Like, I think it's awesome. You just equip a sword to it now, and you know, I think it's got more value.
So it's more useful in Stoneblade because you have some evasive ways to get through with the
right. And also, I mean, you're talking about a creature that is alongside other creatures. It's more likely to survive also. And so I do like it there. I think my only thing I would do differently here is I don't think you need 4 Uros either. I think you can feasibly play 3, and that's more than enough. Especially since you're control deck. You're not racing it out. You can easily land 1 or 2 and protect it, and you're in control. So some number tweaks, maybe 3 of the Uros. I actually upped Teferi to 3. Teferi is just godly. I would play at least 3 of those before I play a 4th Uro. I'm not totally against Ice Fang. I mean, how many snows are you playing? Let me just go down again.
We have 20 spells.
No, the snowlands. I want to see the snowlands.
The snowlands. Okay, yeah. Snowlands. We were at 1 plains, 4 islands, 2 forests.
So 7, and then he also has the 8. What do you call it? Fetch lands. It's not bad.
We have 10 fetch lands. We have 4
10
rainforests.
Yeah.
2... sorry, no, we have 8. We have 8. I thought
it's
8 was a fetch.
So again, I think that Ice Fang is fine. It's just fine. I don't think it's the optimal list for it, but I'm not opposed to it. I think that Teferi should be 3, or can be 3. I like the Aether Gust, actually. I think Aether Gust is good tech right now in the main. I think it's a bright spot. I'm indifferent with Thought Scour. I think I'd rather see Growth Spiral, like Doomswitch's list, in this spot. I'm not crazy about. I mean, even being in a situation where you thought scour your planeswalker is shitty in control. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not crazy about thought scour. It's an experiment. I understand players are experimenting in different spots besides opt. Don't think that thought scour is it. But this list is solid. I mean, it's a good way to build. I like that you also have 3 Field of Ruins with 25 lands. That's a good number when you're playing a 3-color deck. And you're trying to incorporate Field of Ruin. I think 25 lands is good.
Outside of Tron, like what is the main purposes of like Field of Ruin?
I mean, Tron is a big factor.
Yeah,
But
so
I
that's why
mean,
I say outside, because that's the obvious one.
right. But you also have a lot of decks with Mystic Sanctuaries right now.
Okay, so
the,
to prevent
the,
the loops, you can
the
like
loops,
target their
absolutely.
sanctuary.
Yep, definitely. And also, I mean, I've also seen it used against like Cavern of Souls. I mean, when it's actually a key area. And I'm actually happy you're on the show today with this, because I always tell players who play against like decks that can flash creatures in with Vial, or can, Cavern of Souls a creature. When you take away those aspects, they become more fair decks. And I
Oh
feel
yeah.
like they're easier to manage. You're able to actually play your spells as a control player. When I used to play one Stony Silence against, merfolks, because Aether Vials were a pain in the ass and I couldn't deal with them, they functioned slower. I mean, they didn't really. I mean, it wasn't like a game changer if it came late, but if it was early enough, and I'm able to like kind of stave off some of the crazy interactions and like interacting with my spells at instant speed. Yeah, I thought it was great. It allows you to even play Supreme Verdict without being interrupted, right? So
I
I think
remember when control decks were bringing in like one Stony Silence, I actually refused to bring in any relics because that one Stony Silence was just a really big liability. Like
right.
relic is like nice, but not, at least a few years ago, but it was not super mandatory because it was basically just trying to interact with Snapcaster Mage. So that
But I do like that this deck accounts for it. It's like that's the same reason why Seize is, I think, so solid, because I mean I think even like Field of the Dead is another way to utilize the disruption. So I think that the card as a 3 of in a 3-color list is a sweet spot. Now if you're running like 23 lands and you're playing 3 Field, I'm gonna say no. But 25 lands in this list is solid, and the sideboard actually looks good too. You're playing 3 total Gust in the 75. Veil of Summer's awesome. The rejection's fine. I'd actually up Veto to 2. Ishiok's fine, and the Elder's fine. I mean, that's pretty much it. It's
I
a
don't
good
even know what
list.
this card is.
Well,
Vigilance, Reach,
yeah,
Trample,
it's a powerhouse. It's good.
create when it attacks or blocks, create
Yeah,
beasts, or gain life or draw a card. It's
yeah.
basically like mono green Uro.
Right. It's like it's like row number 5.
Yeah, row number 5.
Yeah. So I think the list overall is sound. I think it's a good list.
If you had in a veto, what would you take out?
In this, probably Veil Summer. Don't think you need 3 Veil Summers. I think 2 is fine.
Okay, interesting. I would just mention that a lot of people in the beginning were trying Thought Scour because they thought it had good synergy with Uro, and they were building their decks to try to fill the graveyard really quickly for an
Mhm.
Uro. But in the end, the decks that actually prevailed were the ones that just ignored the graveyard. Like naturally, you'll get cards in the graveyard as a control deck.
That's
And
that's typically we touched on this early on, where players look at a card and then try to go all in and like dilute their entire, like really just uh put blindfolds on to like any other opportunity to like diversify your deck and your threats and whatnot, and just really just put all their eggs in one basket. And a card like Thought Scour, when you're putting all your eggs in Uro's basket, you're diluting the rest of your deck.
because Uro actually saw no play in Modern, basically no competitive play for a month, because it wasn't until they just threw it in as a random win condition in the control decks that it actually started winning. Because otherwise, there was just
Uro's so good that it doesn't need
yeah,
any additional support. Card just stupid good by itself.
awesome. Thank you so much for the deck
Oh,
submission,
and one more
TIST.
point actually on that list. Happy he's playing 2 verdicts. I think that's one. I interviewed Benny Hills recently, and he thinks one of the mistakes players are making is that they're cutting verdict. You're a control deck. Play verdict. Play verdict. And at worst case scenario, at its worst, you're using it to pitch to force.
That's a good point. Nothing's dead if you have something to pitch to force a negation.
Right. I like at 2 to 3 verdicts in the 75 right now for control for sure.
Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. Whoops. All right, you're here for deck list review. And our next special list is from Okio. It is Ultra Budget Pioneer. Let's see if we can do our best.
You might have more
budget.
You might have more experience with this than I do.
Maybe. I haven't played very much Pioneer myself, but and the real challenge is we also have to try to make it budget.
Right.
So what is this?
What's the budget?
Dimir Control.
Oh man, this is like you mean like off the it's not only is Pioneer I'm not well versed in, but it's 2 colors that I'm not even.
Okay, well, let's quickly do what we could best do. So there's one. Okay, there's a Cling to Dust, an Essence Scatter. Nice art. I didn't even know this art existed. 4 Opt, 2 Sinister Sabotage, 4 Heartless Act, destroy target creature with no counters on it, or remove up to 3 counters from target creature. 3 Censor, 3 Fatal Push, 2 Mystical Dispute, 1 Treasure Cruise, 2 Languish, a Witching Well. This is basically your extra versions of Opts. What are the creatures? Lockmere Serpent, Flash. Let's just consider this.
Well, look. This list gets an A because it plays a creature with Flash. That's all I can say. Like I'm huge with Flash creatures, so that's a plus for me. In fact, actually, Nikachu, this is an opportunity also for Neo to learn a couple things. So if you have any any word of advice on some of these, I'd like to get into Pioneer because not only will it help me kind of branch into a different format and help players. But I've been getting a lot of requests, even for coaching, like, hey, can you, so I like to get acquainted a bit more with Pioneer, especially since I hear it's actually the best format right now because it's very limited.
Well, I don't know if it's the best format. I'm still sticking to Modern, but
me too.
Pioneer's back in the game. But I honestly think because it's still failing to fire events. And I think what it needs, and I've been speaking about this for months, Wizards needs to make like a Pioneer Open to encourage people to start playtesting it and like get ready for like the big Pioneer event. And there's just nothing to encourage people. Like even right now, there's a lot of Legacy Open events and Historic Open events that are being encouraged and promoted. And with that around, there's no reason to like be grinding Pioneer. And obviously, Modern is just the anchor. It's so strong and so popular that it doesn't matter. Well, I guess it does matter. It can get to a point where it's like it's in a really bad spot, like it was last year with Hogak. But
what would be awesome, because I've seen this question come up a lot actually, like what were Moderns like, because we were looking at like the best decks of the generation, okay, that decade. Like in Modern, we've hit pretty much a decade since its inception. Like 2011, I think is when, right? Like I'd like to look back and see like what were the game-changing, like format defining decks that like changed Modern, right? Like in my primer, I mentioned Shadow and Eldrazi Winter. Like those were huge. But we have decks like even like Phoenix was a big one. Hogak, Dredge. Can you think of any other ones that? Well, I have to touch on this deck, but that's actually a question I was thinking about.
So we'll go through this deck and then we'll quickly talk about that. So I don't know Excel target card from a graveyard. What do you need to do with it? Does this even have?
I don't know if it has the same applications as Modern.
Oh, maybe it hits Uro. That's about it.
Okay. Yeah.
I think Uro is still legal in because they just banned what's it called? Underworld Breach.
Mm-hmm.
And also there's nothing filling the graveyard. Well, I can't even remember if Dimir and Verdi utilize the graveyard very much. One essence. So it'd be great to have Skura on here. He'd probably have some really, because he played a lot of Pioneer.
Yeah,
Skura. He was definitely a Pioneer player, mostly blue-white. So yeah, how about this? Just from a control element perspective,
Mhm.
So okay, so first off, you should make your mana as consistent as possible.
That's a good way to approach
I
it.
can't
Yeah.
really speak too much on the main deck.
Well, let's
Maybe
see
you
if
want to
it
have
at
four
least
beetle push.
adheres to. Let's see if it at least adheres to the control, design of how you would build a control deck. So it, to me, it has the fundamentals of a control design, and if these are like the best you could be playing right now, I mean, he's got the removal, the counter spells, the ops, the consistency is there. There's 25 lands. Those creatures actually look pretty damn strong.
Yep.
Uh, so, and there's planeswalkers. Now, can there be more planeswalkers in blue black in Pioneer? I'm not too sure. Is 3 enough? Like, is that too little? I'm not too sure.
Right. So like how many planeswalkers ideally are you comfortable with in a control deck? This is a good question.
So, I mean, again, I can't speak really for Pioneer,
Sure.
but for Modern, we're looking at, if you look at, I think I put together what a control skeleton would look like, right? And I think like when you just account to Fairy and Jace, like they're staples, they're mandatory.
Yeah.
So I feel like between those, at minimum, you're playing 2 of each. So I'd say anywhere from 4 to 10. Believe it or not, even 10 planeswalkers I've seen also. I think 4 to 10 is the range you want to see in like a control deck. 10 could be a bit, over excessive, but I think like 4 to 8. But on the higher end, when they're really, really good, I say 10. You can see that.
I believe this deck is on a budget. However, even though it's on a budget, I think we can take advantage of like probably one more Sunken Hollow, and if nothing else, how many things do we have to do on turn 1? Because maybe you could play just one of those tap lands. How bad do you think it would be? Like, okay, how consistent do you think this mana base is? In
10
your
islands.
taste, we have like 10 islands, 10 swamp. We are playing with quite a few cantrips. We're playing 4 opt, and 3 censor can be considered a cantrip.
You might actually, honestly, I mean, because how much does Lockmere cost? 7, I think it was.
6.
6. Honestly,
You easily have that mana.
honestly, there's cards that cantrip into cards, and you have ops and whatnot. I'd actually drop this down to 24. I think you can get over 24 lands in this deck. Honestly.
Okay. Maybe you can add another Treasure Cruise. I'm
Yeah.
assuming they're playing Treasure Cruise over Dig Through Time for budget reasons. Treasure Cruise probably costs pennies. Dig Through Time will cost something.
Right. Yeah. I don't think
It's
you
a
need
rare.
20.
Oh, and there's a Witching Well as also as a scrying machine.
Yep. Don't need 20. I'm telling you, that's actually one of the things we talked about earlier about fine tuning and balancing control lists to be more versatile. And I found that over time that 3 was key. I use that term like 3 is key. Is that 3 is the middle ground between seeing it enough if it's an important spell, but not seeing it too much and giving you the room. Because let's say you're playing 4 of a card, right? And we're gonna use it like Murderous Rider, for example, is a good example. If you were to play 4 right now, maybe you don't get that Notion Thief, right? So by playing just 3, you're going to see enough. It's a core part of your game plan, but you're also able to diversify your threats by playing a Notion Thief or whatever. So I think if you want to balance your lists out, I would lower the land count a little bit, and then maybe improve Treasure Cruise. Yeah, to maybe one more Planeswalker.
How many enter the battlefield tap lands can you afford to play in this deck? Because I'm sure there's a few of those like blue-black Dimir lands that like comes into play tap, gain 1 life. And there's like, those cost nothing.
Right.
How big of a liability would it be to add a few of those lands here?
Are these
mandatory?
Are these even coming into the? No, they're not coming into the. Well,
this one enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands.
Should
so
not
I guess this is already a early game.
Yeah, it shouldn't be an issue at all. But I think that the way it's actually a good question. We could have tackled earlier on too. How many tap lands can you play in a control list? That depends on how many turn 4 plays you have that are important to your game plan. I think that if you're playing a more efficient list, then the average converted mana cost is about 2 to 2.5. Is more on the more efficient end. I think you can afford to play more tap lands because you're still going to be able to play a lot more of your spells. But when you're really relying on a turn 4 verdict, or you're really relying on a turn 4 Jace, and you're just drawing more tap lands, not a good place to be. So I'd say like the max you'd want in a control list is 4 tap lands when there's 25, and then I used Colony as an example, okay? Because
because that has to come into play tapped.
Right. So that's the most you would see. But I feel like the more you're playing instant speed spells, and you want to play in your opponent's turn, I'd say that the less is better. And this list looks like they're playing a lot of things at instant speed, a lot of things to interact, delve and whatnot. Like, even Ocean Deep has flash, Lock Me has flash. I don't think you want to see too much tap lands here. I think actually max I play is 1 or 2.
Awesome. All right, so let's go. We'll find another deck. And then we'll finish it off with that discussion on the powerful decks of Modern.
Sure.
Matt C's list has been chosen. Congratulations, you're the next contestant on deck list review. Blue-White Modern. There you go.
Okay, let's take a look. Ooh, interesting already. Okay.
And this is going to be a 3 Snapcaster Mage, 2 Mentor list of 1 Vendilion Click, 2 Teferi Time Raveler, 1 Hero of Dominaria, 1 Elspeth Sun's Champion, haven't seen that one in a while, 4 Opt, 4 Path, 2 Snare, 4 Frantic Inventory, a new one, 1 Logic Knot, 2 Mana Leak, 2 Archmage's Charm, a Force of Negation, 1 main deck Timely Reinforcements, 2 Cryptic Command, 2 Supreme Verdict, 1 Detention Sphere. And then here's a glance at the mana base that we've got.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot that we can comment on this one. It's got some neat ideas. I will give it that. There's some neat things going on here.
All right.
But we have to
unravel it.
Yeah, this is actually for those watching, this is an awesome opportunity to learn like the importance of like card quality. And understanding how important it is to balance your spells out, and always look at how many spells of X spell can I maximize before playing my next option, right? It's like what are the most important spells, and then max them out, and then look at your flex spots. In a list like this, you're right off the bat, where's Jace the Mind Sculptor? Right, like that's very, very important. Right. Whereas if you're telling me this is a budget list, then I'd say okay, let's see what we can do. But if it's a budget list, then I'd say let's play something else, because you're really missing the heart of what makes Control even have a win condition. You know what I mean? Like in game 1. So let's talk about the creatures first. So 3 Snapcaster Mage is totally fine. I think it's there's enough spells here for it to have value. I actually like the Mentor route. I think Mentor, if you're gonna have any turn the corner beat down creature that can also provide blocking and defending, it can go wide, which is actually relevant against Jund also. I think that Monastery Mentor is that creature we've seen in the past. My only caveat here is that like when you play Verdict, it's not like playing Verdict like in the other deck. When you Verdict Mentor, there's no other value. You just lost everything, right?
You get prowess.
Yeah,
and then it all gets wiped away.
Yeah. So the only thing though is that I will give it this is that like if you have that like corner case scenario where like you're playing Teferi with Mentor and you play Supreme Verdict instant speed, you can get an attack phase in before you decide to wipe the board kind of thing, instant speed. But overall, I like Mentor a little more when there's Terminus, because if you wipe it away, you can then filter through your deck and then draw it again. But that's why you want Jace, because then Jace can easily find Mentor again, and then you just continue. Again, it's going to hurt your opponent a lot more than it hurts you.
We do have a little bit more information. So Matt C's says that there's no Jace or Force because it is a semi-budget list.
Oh, semi-budget. Okay,
so we do have a little bit more information now.
Yeah, that's good.
With that in mind,
for sure.
What can we do?
At the very least, if you really, really, really want to make this a more budget list, then I'd actually go all in on a mentor, like mentor plan, making it a blue-white list when you're playing, because you're actually going to be attacking a corner that players aren't used to, right? No one's playing mentor really in the main. So I'd actually try to capitalize on what you're trying to do with mentor and make this very close to, there's a list I can help you out with. I can connect with you afterwards. I got to find it first. A really good example to go off of and then update with some of the new cards. The list was actually playing 4 mentors, 4 Snapcaster mages, I think 1 click or so, right? There was no Stone Blade. This is back then. But what was nice about this list is that there was like a lot of redundancy. You want to maximize in the list like this. You want to maximize your instant speed spells because you're really taking advantage of Mentor. And so there's some things that I want to comment here about that is that you're not playing enough Teferi. Like I think that if you're going to skimp on Jace, then you want to really own in on your most powerful planeswalker. So at the very least, play 3 Teferi.
Can you go to 4?
You can go to 4 here. Actually, if you're going, my opinion is if you're going with the Monastery Mentor route, Monastery Mentor alongside Teferi is a nightmare. Okay, because you're protecting your Teferi, your Mentor from removal at instant speed. If your opponent can't interact with Mentor, yeah, they're not in a good position. So really make this about Mentor and Teferi. Like this is like the key area here. Make this about, if it's a 2-color list, try to make it about them. And I think that you'll see improvements in like where this deck is evolving, can evolve into. That being said, I don't think you need Sun's Champion in the main. I think Sun's Champion can easily be delegated to the sideboard. That's an opportunity to play Teferi, a 3rd Teferi Time Raveler. If you really want another threat that can put bodies on the board, I'd actually rather spend, believe it or not, I'd rather spend 6 mana on Secure the Waste. Secure the Waste in an instant speed list with Monastery Mentor is scary. And you have Teferi Time Raveler that can actually prevent your opponent from interacting with Secure the Waste. So end of turn, instant speed, make like 8 bodies, your opponent is pretty much done. While also fueling Monastery Mentor. So I actually think Secure the Waste would be awesome in a list like this. But up the Mentor to 3 to 4. And I do like the click. Actually, click is solid. Click is actually nice alongside Mentor because you can kind of determine when is the right time to resolve Mentor, right? Maybe bait a removal out or push removal so Mentor can stick. That's good. And as far as your spells are concerned, we're gonna go down and look at some of the spells. I like that you're on 2 Spell Snare. I think Spell Snare is definitely on the higher end of important cards right now. I don't like 1 Force. I know it's one of your expensive cards, but make it 2.
$50 for 1.
I know. You didn't specify what your semi budget was, so if you can spare another $50, play 2 Force at the very least. That being said, because you're not playing Force, I would again then try to find something that before Force, what did people play? Dovin's Veto. Dovin's Veto is a fantastic card right now. Since you're playing some tech, I see, in something like Detention Sphere or whatever. I think Dovin's Veto is good enough right now to also be played in the main as tech. So you can play 1 Veto if you really can't afford the Force of Negation. Play a Veto in the main. Going back up, the Frantic Inventory, that's been under some scrutiny. Not everyone's on board with this card being like
new card.
It's new cards worth experimenting, but I don't think it's. I think it's one that is flexible enough to experiment with other options. I think this is here because of Mentor. So if so, play more Mentor. So you're able to capitalize on instant speed. Draw a card and bam. What's nice about Frantic Inventory, it's a card that draws. It's a volume. It stacks, right? It gets better as more in the graveyard. So, but I always said this, like a card like let's take Fact or Fiction, right? Or Illumination, or the one that's like 4 mana. You can play it. Forgot the name of it right now, But anyway, kind of lose my train of thought here. But it's basically a card that draws you more cards, right? It's 4 mana. Let's take a look and see what other.
What's the other one? I mean, I remember
something Illumination.
Fiction. Come on. Why is there so many results?
Oh, right there. Right there. Okay. So
this one.
So it's scary to have a card that draws more cards when you're drawing it to guess. So a card like Factor Fiction in one of my buddies' list, that's mid range, you Factor Fiction into like threats. It makes it much more difficult for your opponent to choose.
Oh, they're saying it's Hieroglyphic Illumination.
Illumination, that's the one. Yeah.
That's the, that's the draw 2, and you can cycle forward.
Right. So what's nice about a card like that is that, like in a mentor list, is that you actually can, draw into your gas. You could draw into your mentors. You could draw into more spells for mentor. You know what I mean? Because you want volume. You want to be able to, sling a bunch of spells and make bigger creatures and more creatures. So I like the volume there. So I use Factor Fiction as an example, is that like this card, like why didn't it see as more modern play? Well, because controllers aren't really playing like a bunch of diversified threats, and you don't really need that kind of volume. But when you are playing a card like Master Mentor, this is like a solid 4-drop instant speed top end that can like turn the corner on the game completely. Like it's a card that can potentially win you the game. But in a traditional control list, it might not, right? So Factor Fiction has more value in a list like this. So one card to look into, very, very strong.
Also, I find that Factor Fiction, because I'm seeing this pretty often, I think in the teamer lists, so the Sultai list, but basically like it's really good if you can utilize the graveyard. So especially in these Uro decks or all these Uro pile decks, it's amazing because you Factor Fiction, and it's difficult to, what do you want to put in the graveyard, because they're going to utilize it anyway.
Yeah, and how about what if
they're going to get cards in the graveyard?
Or what if your opponent decides to throw some frantic inventories in your graveyard? Then you're like, right. Awesome, right? So yeah, I think Factor Fiction has an opportunity here. What I like to do, if you ever want to refer to my primer, what I like to do, and I will be expanding this section, is I like to write top options lists for particular lists. So I'll pick like one top performing list, and below it, I'll make a card pool. And a lot of my Azorius friends like make fun of this because they're like, okay, Fran, like you're just basically giving them the entire pool of cards as options, but it's not. No, these are just, I like to give players options to tune their list. So I usually will choose the best for that metagame as top options to tune. You know what I mean? Because things do change, and I think that Factor Fiction should be one of the ones that you consider here.
Right.
So as far as the rest of your spell list, I think you're fine. Detention Sphere, I'm not hot on, but there are some things that it can interact with that are worth exploring. But I think that ultimately Detention Sphere, in the face of something like like Veil Summer, or anything that's can just instant, it's like sorcery speed, and you can't, what I mean, like it's to feel bad. And it's just, I just feel like right now there's also decks playing more trophies, more, I feel like it's not in the best spot. However, here's the big however. When you give your opponent more things to remove, it spreads their removal thin. So if you're trying to put something on the battlefield that will warrant a removal, that takes away removal from a mentor or whatever, then it might be worth, considering. But because Attention Sphere is not a creature, and because Attention Sphere is not, and because you're not playing a lot of Planeswalkers, Detention Spheres kind of sticks out like a sore thumb, right? Like you're not really capitalizing on Sphere from a baiting angle, and you're not really, catching much with just one. So I'd say it's probably one that you can remove. Now, my biggest issue is seeing 3 colonnades here with 24 lands.
And 3 Field of Ruin, because earlier you said
3 Field of Ruin.
3 Field of Ruin was great with 25 lands. I'm curious to know what's the difference.
So it's different, but it's different in blue white. You can play actually 4 Field of Ruins with 24 lands in blue white. The reason being is because you're only playing 2 colors. You don't need as many. You're not trying to set up as many different mana requirements. So like 4 and 24 is fine. 4 and 20 and 3 and 24 is fine. But my only issue with this is that you're playing more tap out lands in a list that wants to place in more instant speed because of Mentor. I would cut down colony to 2 with 24 lands. Not to say not to play at all, but 2 colonnades. And also, you're playing 3 Mystic Sanctuaries with 2 Cryptic Commands. It should be the opposite. It should be more Cryptic Commands and less Sanctuary, or a 1-to-1 ratio. Other than that, oh, and you don't need 3 Hollow Fountains. I think you can probably play another land in that spot. Yeah, I don't. If you can avoid hurting yourself more in blue-white, then do that. Yeah, I mean, mana base is one of the strengths of playing 2 colors, and I think you don't really need to have, the only way I would play a 3rd Hollow Fountain is if you're playing more fetch lands.
Right.
And there seems to be only 4 Fledged Strain here. You're not playing any additional fetch lands, and I think that if you can afford to play, right, if you can afford to play the cheapest one, Polluted Delta, I would play a Polluted Delta in here. If you want to go for the Prairie Stream plus a Hollow Fountain as additional multicolored.
Should we then play like a 4th Field of Ruin as like, I don't know, like a pseudo fetch land?
Yeah, you can absolutely, or even like something like you can even, if you're trying to get basics, you can even get something like Ghost Quarter.
Okay, interesting.
Actually, you know what's nice to add in this list right now is Crucible Worlds and Ghost Quarter. I think is actually a nice alternative win condition for control. You can ramp yourself that way too, by the way. With Crucible Worlds, it's like a little thing control players were doing back in the day, is ramping yourself every turn playing a land with the fetch land and Crucible Worlds. But you can also repeatedly use Ghost Quarter on lands, and so I think that's an element. In fact, I just recently saw a list in a 5.0 that was playing the Crucible Worlds plus Ghost Quarter, and it also ran Field of Ruin. So another nice touch you can add to this list.
Well, I don't understand. How do you ramp with Ghost Quarter?
Explain. It's not pseudo ramp. It's not ramp in the traditional sense. It's basically getting yourself lands every turn. And the reason you do that is the Crucible Worlds can return a land. You just return.
You like Ghost Quarter your own land. You have 2 lands in the graveyard, and then you can slowly deploy them back.
Well, Ghost Quarter. When you Ghost Quarter something, but you have to get a basic. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The reason why Crucible Worlds can be used as like a pseudo ramp is you can actually keep bringing back your Flooded String, your fetch land. So you bring back your fetch land. You're drawing a land out of your deck. You're thinning out your deck every turn, pretty much.
That I get.
Yeah. So it's not ramp in the traditional sense, like playing 2 lands per turn, but it's basically ensures you get land drops, which is a nightmare in the mirror. Because if you're able to fetch land every turn and your opponent is a control player that needs to play its spells, then you're way ahead to go way to go. Also, you can win control mirrors with Crucible Worlds too, by the way, by just Ghost Quartering all their sources, and it's like, oh shit.
Yeah, eventually they'll run out of basics.
Right, exactly.
But so I just didn't get how the Ghost Quarter ramps you, because I understand. I mean, without Ghost Quarter, Crucible Worlds and a fetch land will get you the lands infinitely.
That's what I meant. I didn't mean Ghost Quarter. I meant that the Ghost Quarter, you can't really play Field of Ruin with Crucible Worlds to the same effect as you would with the Ghost Quarter, because Ghost Quarter doesn't require 2 land tapped, and you're not going to do it as efficiently. But historically, you play a Crucible Worlds with 1 or 2 Ghost Quarters, and that's a good way to interact with lands and kind of kill land, like a land destruction element to your deck.
Okay.
But you do that with Ghost Quarter better than you can with Field of Ruin. But the ramping aspect comes from the fetch lands. Basically, you're just playing a land a turn.
Gotcha. But this may not be a big deal, but you're talking about how Detention Sphere is a liability because of Veil of Summer, and you said, you're not likely to hit 2 cards anyway. Why not then run like Banishing Light? Or it's like some sort of other O-ring effect.
Yeah, that's actually totally feasible. And a lot of players right now are playing around the popular spells that the green-based decks are playing, right? So you gain more equity, like you said, playing something like that if you want that kind of effect than Detention Sphere right now. It's the same reason why players are playing Molten Rain. Like, I think it's what you were saying, like the difference between Fulminator Mage and Molten Rain is like night and day. It doesn't give you the body, but you're also not getting blown out.
Exactly. What can you speak on this sideboard? We got 1 Surgical Extraction, 2 Ether Gust, 2 Celestial.
Oh, and by the way, Ghost Quarter is also better with Surgical Extraction than it is with
Ghost Quarter, Surgical, your Tron land.
Yep.
Right. Better. You're now on making land drops.
Mm-hmm.
2 Ether Gust, 2 Celestial Purge, 2 Dovin's Veto. One of them should be in the main.
Yes, and
4
I like
Fireworker.
Firewalker, boy. I mean, you can go up to 3 right now if you really wanted to. That card,
Yeah.
yeah, right now. Oh, look at it. He's like, I am not losing a burn anything. He's got three timing reinforcements in 75 plus the 2 core
Right,
Firewalker.
right.
Yeah, and I love the Gearhawk. That's a like near and dear for me. I have a whole guide on like the beauty of Gearhawk. You can use Gearhawk against like artifact decks. You can like when Urza was big, that was one way to like blow the entire board up, or even like a Lantern deck, or the 2 biggest decks it was good against when it was first revealed. This card it does anything. It was against Spirit Nightmare, because you can Verdict, it's terrible because Spellcaller. But then you have something like this that, well, too bad. You never saw this coming, and it's like they're 1/1 spirit against like your Cataclysmic Gearhawk. You know what I
Exactly.
mean? Yeah, so that's a great way to go. Or I got one of the most beautiful plays I've had was against Dredge with the Rest in Peace. Because now you're just like, okay, wipe the board, you keep 1 creature. I have Gearhawk. You lost everything because Rest in Peace. The biggest factor with that is that you have the body turn a corner. We talked about this earlier. Not only is this a board wipe, but against decks where you don't want to go long, you really want to turn the tides. Gearhawk provides that. A deck that's good against is even humans. Humans just can't deal with this card. They don't see it coming at all. It's not as popular as it used to be, Gearhawk. So a meddling mage player will likely not name Gearhawk as a sweeper. And it gets around Freebooter. It gets around a lot of stuff. It even gets around the taxing effects from Thalia. So I really, really like this card a lot. That's what I would do. And I've used it alongside Resto, so I'm a little biased here. I get to keep a Resto and a Gear at the same time. So
Awesome. All right. Matt C said this was there's a lot of burn at their local game store, so that's why they're probably gearing hard on against burn.
yeah, no, and honestly, overall, you did a good job here. I think incorporating Mentor was my favorite aspect of this. As you know already, if you tuned into the beginning of this segment, I'm big on turning the corner and applying pressure as a control player, and this is one of the best ways to do it out of the main.
All right, I hope that was valuable, Matsy. I hope that was some really good insight into blue-eye control and the variations that you can play with Mentor. Great, thanks for sharing the list. All right, so let's finish this off by you wanted to talk about like the most like haymaker decks that I've ever seen play in Modern or something.
Yeah, that would be an awesome way to finish this off. Like nice little history lesson, and why those decks really changed the shape of this format.
So like, are we going to talk after the great bannings of like, I don't know, I think it was like 2011 or something when the format initially, because there was a lot of broken decks back then. Then they created this gigantic ban list.
Right. I'm going to go based on where my primer starts. This is a blue-white. It's an Azorius segment here. I think we should go based on where I mentioned the primer, how Shadow and Eldrazi changed control, but not just control, just the way the format, built their decks, which is to be way more efficient. And if you weren't efficient, then you're doing it wrong. You know what I mean? I think it's the key thing here. And also to just kind of change the philosophy of how your decks are built in the sense that, you want to play more to the board. You don't want to play passively and like, okay, go. You go. No, there's no go. There's either do something or you're going to get your face beat in. That's what Shadow did. And that's what Eldrazi did. And then you look at other variations of, the most powerful decks in the format, and you saw Phoenix, which also beat your face in quickly. You have, Hogak Dredge, which was like ridiculous. And then you have Humans. At one point, Humans was also like, is this a broken deck? Actually, we found out it isn't a broken deck. It's a very disruptive deck that plays to the board. So
it was super death and taxes.
Super death and tax. Yeah, everything. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's like super Walmart and super everything. Like these decks, these were like the same versions of decks, just like amplified on steroids. They were just super versions of established archetypes. What I love about Modern is that compared to other formats, like cards that are good cards. Like they don't become bad; they just become a bit irrelevant. right? So like a deck like Shadow, like the best decks, and you said it perfectly before, the decks that stand a test of time are those that can adapt over time. Those are the ones that stick in the format. So even though decks were cards were banned out of the format, like Hogak, Dredge is still a good deck. Dredge will always still be a good deck, right? And Dredge prize on a metagame that like goes under the radar for graveyard decks, and then it's like, okay, no one's playing graveyard. Dredge comes in and wipes the floor. And the same can be said about Shadow. The reason why Shadow continues to work is because its philosophy is efficiency. It's disruption and pressure at an efficient rate. And so as long as it can maintain that, and this format like rewards that, then Shadow's always going to be a good deck. It may not be the best deck to choose from, but now we're talking about player with experience. Someone who's a master of Shadow will have a lot more success with that than just playing the flavor of the week.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, yeah, so that's, and it was cool too, is like I actually learned off Shadow. Like that, the player who taught me how to play, that's what he played back then. In fact, he doesn't play Magic anymore, but I was like, dude, find that list. Like, I want to make an article about like the first, I'm going to give it to a Shadow player because this guy was playing Shadow in like 2009. And like, he like loved it for standard. And when Death Shadow was like this weird creature that like no one cared about, and it literally pulled out of like our shoebox of cards. Like it was like not a good card, but he liked it. And I was like, yeah, do you know that your Shadow deck is still relevant in 2020?
Yeah.
You know, so it survived all those years because it was an efficient threat and players found a way to make it work. So I think that no matter what deck you look at, even big mana decks are operating efficiently. Tron, big mana deck, operating efficiently. So I think the best decks in Modern, even for the future, are going to continue being decks that can do more with less. And that's the way, and also consistency. So consistency, efficiency, and being proactive are the key elements to the best decks in Modern, and also being able to disrupt what your opponent is doing without but also applying pressure. Like just playing disruption isn't going to work, but disruption alongside pressure, that's what works in Modern.
I think the efficiency and consistency is even more important when the London Mulligan rule came in, because that enabled a lot of archetypes to be way more consistent, way more efficient,
Right.
to just mulligan down to the most proactive hand at 5 cards, putting an enormous amount of pressure on some like generic clunky 7 card hand. And now we are forced in a position to be like, even the way I play Merfolk right now, I want to be way more efficient than I ever was before. I prefer to be way more proactive. Like I said, I love playing Merfolk as a control deck, but I've recognized now I need to be, I'm way more often leaning more into the aggro role, because even against control decks these days, I need to beat you in a reasonable amount of time. A long time ago, there was no Jace the Mind Sculptor, Teferi Time Reveler, Teferi Hero of Dominaria.
Right.
There are now so many one card basically win conditions in the control deck.
Yes.
That I could basically be lost at any moment that any of them resolve. So I actually
That's why
cannot go into turn 12 against control.
No, and that's why I mentioned the importance of turn 2 Snapcaster Mage, because you're really trying. You're not relying just on snap. You're just relying on your ability to make them fumble. And once they fumble, that's when you capitalize on their mistakes. Like it's the only you can do, because like Geist of St. Trapped is so great against control, because if they resolve a Jace or Teferi, it's irrelevant. Like Geist is going to get through anything, right? So you want to put your opponent in positions to do what they're not comfortable with doing, right? Or playing a spell before they really want to play a spell. Don't give them the ability to sculpt their hand. And when you're playing efficient decks like that, you're putting the pressure on, you're putting the heat on, and they don't have time to establish, control or a combo or a ramp. So efficiency will continue to be very, very important. And I love that Merfolk is one of those like legacy type, when it wants to be, control decks where it's like super efficient at doing what it does, while also being able to turn the corner if it needs to.
It's funny that you mentioned the Snapcaster Mage plan, because the very first time I ever saw this was in Splinter Twin. Because in the traditionally, I don't know if this is perfect, but like Merfolk got a huge win percentage against Splinter Twin because we played like Twin usually plays like a control deck versus Merfolk, but we ended up being a better control deck versus their control plan. But the plan that undermined this, and this was played against me by a few Twin players, is that they just went aggro against me. Like if I want to play slow, okay, they speed up. They did go turn 2 Snapcaster Mage, and I'm like, okay. And then so they start dealing damage points, putting me in a position where I have to tap out if I want to race them, but then I tap out and then they twin me.
Right.
So instead of going the control plan, they're just aggro combo, and that ended up beating my control plan by a huge margin.
Oh yeah.
And I can hear it the same way. You're echoing the exact same thing. Put the pressure on, force them to make a move, and then you'll completely capitalize once you put them in that position.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, I think that's the reason why we continue to see, even like you can ban as many things out of Eldrazi, we're still going to see Tron. You can ban as many things out of Shadow, you're still going to see Shadow. You know, you're still going to see Primeval Titan decks, right? You're still going to see, these are just the best decks, and the same goes for cards. I know it's semantics, but when I see a player in a forum or in my community say, "Oh, the card's bad," ooh, that irks me. Like I hate seeing that, because for new players especially, it's the wrong message to give. Like they're not bad cards, right? And I always look at it from like a coaching perspective. Is like, I don't tell anybody these are bad cards. I tell them, well, unless they really are bad cards. But as far as like good cards are inherently good designs, good cards, but they might not be at their best right now, right? So like prime example of that is Vendilion Click. Like Vendilion Click to me is always a good card, but it may not be the most relevant when there's all these bolts running around and like Ren 6 and whatever, right? But at the very least, even one click against a combo or a Tron deck or whatever can be the difference, especially if you're playing like a beatdown plan, right, where you want to turn the corner. Like that information, like I said, is so invaluable. You know, when I created that deck, it's infamous for being both the most popular and the most controversial, because I played Narset Transcendent before Jace, right? Esper Transcendent. Like I really was riding high in this deck because it presented a new way to play control that players aren't used to. Like, oh wow, control deck with no counter spells, but it's blue-white with black. Like, where are the counter spells? Because I was taking the Esper Mentor approach of disruption, but having stickier threats in Planeswalkers. And I had like Liliana of the Veil in a blue-white deck with Narset Transcendent, where like your opponent really was like in a position where it's like, you have no cards and I have Narset Transcendent, you can't play anything else with the final, right? Like that was the idea. And you also have Gideon, Allies, and the card with Lingering Souls tokens. Like that was the win condition of the deck with Snapcaster and Tasker. And what I liked is that all that information that I gathered from Thoughtseize and Inquisition and all that, and even Vendilion Click I had in that deck, it was more valuable than any counterspell could ever give me, right? Because I was able to play around everything that they were trying to do, and they were then forced to play around what I knew, right? So information, do not underestimate the power of Vendilion Click. It may be a slower Thoughtseize, but its value in helping you determine what to play when is so important to control.
I actually will say that I've talked about this many times, and I want to create like some solid theoretical lectures about this, but like on the value of information, I think it is the fourth resource to Magic, because a lot of people talk about mana, cards, life total. Information is a resource.
It's called virtual card advantage. It's card advantage by way of knowledge of when to play what before your opponent knows when to play. Like that's huge.
A lot of people tell me the value of Inquisition or Thoughtseize is taking a card out of the hand, but like, what about knowing the rest of the hand? I mean, it's not like you forget about that, and that's useful for multiple turns going on. And it goes beyond just knowing your opponent's hand. I mean, people scout to find out, what are people playing in their deck? What are they playing in their sideboard? This is why like ghosting and stream sniping is such a big deal, because that information, the one side that has more information than the other side will just completely wipe them out.
Sure.
It's a more fragile advantage because it takes a good player to utilize it properly. Because I've heard a lot. I played Peak once in Merfolk, and when it was well positioned, it was great because I made so many weird lines only because I knew exactly what my opponent had in their hand. That I would never do if I didn't have access to that information. Shoot, where am I going? where am I going with this?
Let's piggyback off that. Let's take one of the greatest players the game has ever seen, and endorsed by PD. What's his name? Paul Vitor, right?
Oh, Vito Domodorosa.
Yeah. He literally named Yuta Takahashi the greatest player he's ever seen. Right? Why? He's under the radar in terms of like the deck that he plays, but the way he plays it, the way he understands the format, and the way he utilizes his deck to respond to what the format is doing, is the fairies deck that he made.
Mm-hmm.
It does a controversial thing that control players have always, and even like jump players don't. It's like clashing two worlds together. It's playing counter spells alongside disruption. Right? One is card advantage, one's card disadvantage. You're playing one in control. Card control is supposed to be about a card advantage. What are you doing?
Right.
The thing is, he found that fine balance of also applying like pressure through Bitter Blossom, and there's some fairies, and there's planeswalkers, and there's removal, there's counters, right? But this is a philosophy that I utilized in both Esper Twix, where I was playing disruption and gaining knowledge, and taking away their ability to play, and also playing pressure on the board, right? Same thing with Blue White Black Fairies and Esper Transcendent, was the idea that by me knowing what you're playing in the first couple turns, I'm able to establish what my plan is going to be for the rest of the game. And that's so important. And even though I was a slower deck, because I'm not playing Mentors, I'm playing Planeswalkers and Snaps and Lingering Souls, but because of that information, I was able to make a Lingering Souls like a win condition, because I'm able to utilize it at the right time, where I'm pivoting in a way where my opponent is like, okay, well, I'm not ready for this now because you just took away my ability to interact with it. So important. It is so important to, and that's the same thing with Vanilla Click. Vanilla Click pushes away the card you can't deal with, right? Or baits the removal that you don't want used against your Planeswalker or Counterspell. Like, it's important. And I think that players just look at it as the body. Oh, it's a 3/1. It's going to get pink. Stop. No, it's way more valuable than just that. Like you said with some other cards, there's way more to it than just the body.
Well, I learned the value of Peak only because most of the time when I played Click against my opponent, I took nothing, because I just preferred to know exactly what they had in their hand,
right,
over taking something. I mean, if it was a combo piece, sure, but like, okay, you have exactly that card, that card, that card. All right, I don't want to know anymore. I don't want to guess one extra card. Just going to leave you with everything. And then undermine my opponent based on just that knowledge.
Yeah, and especially if you're going like a mirror match we're talking about earlier, like how do you win a mirror match? Well, do you know why Esper Control always beats like Blue White? It's very difficult for Blue White to beat that deck. Well, because they also can bring in Thoughtseize from the sideboard, right? And now like mid game where you're stalemate, that one Thoughtseize late game, it's like playing a Serum Visions late game. It's like, now I know what I want, and that Serum Visions is going to get me what I want because I've already played through my deck, and the chance of me getting that card I want is very high. Same with Thoughtseize. The chance mid game, late game, stalemate to see the card that they're holding on the whole game, right? And you just removed it. Now I could play my Jace and just win the game. Like that is a turning point. And Thoughtseize, there's been so many historic, amazing plays with Thoughtseize being played at the right time that makes a big difference. And Vendilion Click does the same for control. Playing that Vendilion Click in a mirror match when your opponent's been holding on to that one card and they can't play, especially when you have Teferi and they have an instant speed spell they can't play, and Click just takes it away. There goes the game.
There goes the game. All right, so thank you very much for the discussion. This was a fantastic discussion and lessons for Blight control. So for anyone that wants to follow you, find you, get in touch with you, how do they do it, Neo? How do they contact you?
There's various channels. There's a Facebook group, but I understand that everyone's on Facebook or does groups, which is totally fine. I've been requested to start a Discord. I had one, but when I went on hiatus, I shut it down. But it's in the works again. But I also have my own private Discord for those who book sessions through Spice Academy. So I have a Discord there. I also have the Twitter page, which is the twitter.com/Azorius_Sage. You can also find me just in my primer. It's live updates, right? It's free. It's 70 plus pages, 6,000 plus words of content that I think is value. As a philosopher, I think that when it comes to knowledge, don't have to pay for it. It's just my personal philosophy. I'm trying to help players become their own Azorius Sages, and so it's really important for me to, it makes my job easier, because when the players do come to me with questions, they have a knowledge base. Right, it's easier to communicate, right, and we're all trying to make each other better, and that's the key. More better players, the more competitive the game is, and that's so you can find me through the primer. I don't always update every day, but I do list when I'm going to update, and what I'm looking at, and it's going to continue to grow. And then I also have the what do you call it? There's also one more source you can get me if you don't want to do a group. I also have a Facebook business page. Along with Spikes Academy, where it's just facebook.com/Azorius Sage, and it's one word, and that's where I post daily updates on 5.0s for Azorius decks that are putting up performances on TGO, or have any ideas I want to share. It's a good way to keep up with what's going on with Azorius. In Modern.
And remember, if you want links to any ways of contacting Francisco Neo, you'll find all of them in the description below. And as he tells me, I can add Discords or YouTube channels or any other new channels that you
Discord. I'll have that too. And I actually just come back from hiatus. I actually just got an MTGO, so bear with me while I get acclimated to the program. COVID forced me into this, so I'm now going to be an MTGO.
COVID forced me to be a streamer.
But I know it goes without saying, you are an amazing streamer. I mean, besides streaming, I think I started watching your videos when you would just talk about the next big Merfolk card or whatever, just talking. You know what I mean?
Thanks.
And you articulate very well. And so I absolutely enjoyed this. Thanks for having me. I would love to do it again in the future.
No problem.
I want to see your project is to get that fundamental principles for
I gotta get in on that.
Google Docs is great, man. I mean, being able to update it and share everybody is awesome. But anyway, those are the ways to get in contact with me. I do have coaching, like I said. I offer a lot of incentives and rates off, per percentage off. So a lot of players have come away learning. One guy actually said, where was he? I learned 5 years worth of information in 1 hour.
Yeah, that's what coaching will do. It's the fastest way to get yourself up to speed.
And I actually now provide, just so for newcomers or new people who are interested in the coaching, I actually now have worked with somebody to create a document, like a spreadsheet, keeps you all updated with basically a session details, questions you have. I can go into the document and give you feedback on that session. I have my exclusive updated lists in there for students compared to their lists, so we can run numbers together. Cyber guides, all that as part of the coaching program.
Awesome. All right. So that is going to be it for today. It was a fantastic discussion, and yeah, I don't have anything. I don't have anything else to say.
This was awesome. I appreciate it, and I hope that the viewers learned a thing or two about control, or at least just brushed up on something they already knew.
All right. So if you love these things, don't forget. Whatever. Give likes, subscribe, share.
It's appreciated.
All that good stuff. I know a lot of people love these interviews. When we talk to the specialists, we get the in-depth insights and knowledge to archetypes, because it creates a lot of discussion. I mean, you added things to those control decks that I can't feel that this deck needs an extra Teferi or more mentors. I can generally look at the mana base and if there's enough answers, period, versus other things. So it was really nice to hear your takes on those lists.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's what I basically have done, and will continue to do for any player who's wants to get the in and out of Azorius and Modern. Also, if I missed anything in this chat, you can reach me on Twitter after this, or the only place I don't have is YouTube, which once players want me to stream and I learn the ways of MTG, I'll have that up to. But you'll update the channels, as we go along. But it was a pleasure. I appreciate it. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. All right, so this has been Nikachu, Merfolk Master, here with Azorius Sage talking about blue-white control in Modern. Take care, everyone. See you next time.